Hi Reddit, I'm 36F, and I guess this is the first time I'm really talking about all of this in one place. I've kept most of it bottled up for so long that even putting it into words feels strange, like I'm exposing something I wasn't supposed to say out loud. I don't think I ever really understood just how much damage quiet favoritism could do until it happened to me. And no, this isn't some dramatic tale of screaming matches and family estrangement that began with a single explosive moment. It was quieter than that, more careful, and maybe that's what made it so painful. My family's always been performative. Appearances mattered. Smiles were currency, and every family gathering was more of a photo opportunity than an actual chance to connect. My mom, Janice, was the ringleader of it all. My dad, Theo, followed her lead, and my younger sister, Alara, 34F, well, she was the star of the show. Alara was the golden child. Beautiful, charming, high energy, and, as my mom always said, born to shine. I was quieter, studious. I liked books more than attention, which seemed to be both a relief and a disappointment to my parents. "You're so independent," they'd say with a smile, which I later realized was their way of saying, "You don't need much from us, do you?" I used to believe that was a compliment. Looking back now, I can see how early it started. When we were kids, if Alara forgot her homework, Mom would write a note to the teacher explaining it was a tough week. When I forgot mine once in 5th grade, just once, I got a 20-minute lecture about responsibility and how I needed to be more like Alara. That was the pattern. Always. She got understanding. I got expectations. By the time we were in high school, Alara was already being celebrated for her leadership and personality, despite the fact that I was the one consistently making honor roll and tutoring other students in math. Alara got a car on her 17th birthday, a white SUV with a pink bow on top. I got my grandmother's old station wagon the following year, along with a reminder to be grateful we don't believe in handouts. College made things worse, not better. I got accepted into a solid university on a partial scholarship, double majored in communications and sociology, and graduated early. Alara started at the same school a year later, failed out by sophomore year, and then bounced around from job to job while Mom kept talking about how life is about the journey. I paid my own way through grad school with fellowships and assistantships. Alara moved back home, tried a few MLM schemes, and eventually landed a job as an assistant at a real estate firm that our uncle owns. Guess who got a celebration dinner at a waterfront restaurant when they were hired? And guess who got a "we're proud of you, sweetie" over speakerphone the night she submitted her thesis? Right. And yet, I stayed quiet. I told myself it wasn't worth it to stir the pot. That maybe my mom just related more to Alara's bubbly personality. That maybe I was too sensitive. I tried. I really did. I made the trips home for birthdays. I showed up for Mother's Day brunches and engagement parties and baby showers, most of them for Alara's friends, but hosted by Mom as if they were national holidays. I brought thoughtful gifts. I sat quietly through dinner table conversations where everyone talked about Alara's latest adventure. If I tried to share something about my work or my life in the city, it would usually be met with polite smiles, a few nods, and then a quick pivot. "Oh, speaking of work," Mom would say, "Alara got the cutest office plant. It's shaped like a little pig." That was my cue to stop talking. The year before last, something finally shifted in me. I started pulling back. Not out of malice, just fatigue. Emotional exhaustion. I stopped offering up stories about my life unless someone asked. I visited a little less frequently. I skipped one of Alara's endless birthday dinners, and when I called to apologize, Mom sighed and said, "You've been so distant lately." Alara noticed too. I bit my tongue. Again. And then, earlier this year, the real turning point came. I had been working for the past 5 years at a nonprofit that focuses on educational access in underserved communities. It's a lot of behind-the-scenes work, grant writing, lobbying, building partnerships with rural schools. Not glamorous, but meaningful. My team and I had poured ourselves into a multi-year project that expanded digital learning resources to over 200 school districts. To our complete surprise, we were nominated for a national award. And then we won. The ceremony was formal. My name was announced. I gave a short speech. I was photographed. There was a small article published in a local paper and a mention in our organization's newsletter. It was the proudest moment of my career. I didn't tell my family. Not right away. Not because I didn't want them to know, but because I already knew what the response would be. A brief, "That's great, honey," followed by a long story about how Alara's boss said she was doing amazing and might get promoted again. And as if by cosmic alignment, a week after I got the award notification, I started seeing posts in the family group chat about Alara's latest huge milestone. She had been promoted to a managerial position at the real estate firm, a role created specifically for her, from what I could tell. Mom was gushing. There were plans for a party, not a casual get-together. A party, caterers, live music, coordinated outfits, a champagne toast with customized flutes, a local photographer to capture Alara's big moment. The chat was filled with excitement. I waited and waited. No message came. No invite. I figured maybe it was an oversight. Maybe they assumed I'd heard. Maybe I was just meant to show up. So I finally asked, "Hey, what's the date for Alara's promotion party? Want to make sure I'm free." My mom replied an hour later. "Oh, honey," she wrote. "We didn't think you'd want to come, considering how you've been lately." That sentence sat in my chest like a brick. I stared at it for a long time. No one else responded. Not Dad. Not Alara. Not even Marco, our cousin who usually sends a thumbs-up emoji to everything. I typed out a few different replies. Deleted them all. Finally, I settled on something simple. "Then don't expect me at your wedding next year." She saw it. Didn't respond. And just like that, it was done. At least, I thought it was. The day of Alara's party came and went without a single word from my parents. Not a text. Not a missed call. Not even one of those passive-aggressive messages that my mom usually sends, the kind that pretends to check in but is really just another chance to remind me that I'm disappointing them. I didn't reach out either. Instead, I spent the evening at my friend Tessa's apartment. Tessa's been my best friend since college, and if anyone could understand the twisted web of my family dynamic, it was her. She'd seen it firsthand over the years, the way my mom's voice changed when Alara walked into a room, how my dad nodded along to everything my sister said like she was some kind of oracle. She'd watched me bring handmade gifts to family gatherings and leave empty-handed while Alara opened designer purses and got her gas tank filled by Dad on the way home. We sat on her balcony with tea and blankets, listening to the city hum around us. I could hear faint music in the distance, laughter from another apartment, and for a moment, I imagined it was them, my family, dancing and celebrating without me. I had expected to feel angry, maybe bitter, but what I felt was tired. Just tired. "This isn't new," I told Tessa. "It's always been like this. I'm not even surprised." "You shouldn't have to expect it," she said quietly. "That's not normal, Ray." She was the only one who called me that. Ray, short for Raylan, a name my mom used only when she wanted something, or when she was upset and said it sharply, like it was something she regretted picking out. That weekend, I finally unpacked the suitcase from the award ceremony I had attended alone. I hadn't told anyone in my family about the trip, not because I was hiding it, but because I had stopped expecting any of them to care. The event had been surreal. The kind of moment you dream about when you've spent years working in silence. I was called up on stage alongside two colleagues. My name was printed on the program. I was given a plaque and a glass award etched with my name and the title of the project. People clapped. Strangers clapped. And when I returned to the table, blinking under the soft lights and still holding the award, I saw Tessa standing with her phone in hand. She'd flown out to surprise me, using the last of her vacation days, because she'd known, without me saying a word, that I wouldn't have anyone else there. She took the photo right then, me holding the award, eyes shining, genuinely smiling. I hadn't looked that happy in a long time. She didn't post the picture right away. She waited. I don't know why. Maybe because she sensed it wasn't just a celebration, it was proof. The kind of undeniable proof that could finally expose the cracks in my family's carefully polished facade. 2 weeks after Alara's party, she posted it. The caption was simple. "She earned this." And no, they didn't ask. That's all it said. No tagging, no backstory, no drama. But it was enough. The messages started rolling in just a few hours later. First from my dad. "Dad, what's this award about? Alara said you went out of town, but didn't say why." Then my cousin Marco. "Marco, saw Tessa's post. That's huge, Ray. Why didn't anyone say anything?" Then an aunt I hadn't spoken to in months. Then another cousin. And then, finally, Alara. "Alara, wait, what's going on? You got an award? Why didn't you tell anyone?" No one asked why they hadn't been told. They all acted like it had been some big secret I was keeping, like I had intentionally hidden it from them as some kind of punishment. I didn't respond. The messages kept coming. My mom waited 3 days before finally breaking the silence. Mom, Raylan, I don't understand why you would keep something like this from your family. We're always here for you. I hope you're not trying to make a scene. A scene. That's what she thought this was. As if me quietly attending an event that celebrated my work. Work she had never once asked about. Was a stage performance meant to sabotage her carefully curated image of the perfect family. I didn't respond to her either. Not right away. Instead, I let the silence grow. And it did. Because once the photo had been seen, the questions didn't stop. Especially not from relatives outside the immediate family. The ones who didn't know the day-to-day dynamics, but still assumed we were close-knit. They wanted to know why I wasn't in the pictures from Alara's party. Why I hadn't shared my news in the family group chat. Why there seemed to be a growing distance between me and the rest of them. My mom started deflecting. I could see it in the way she responded to comments. Oh, Raylan's been busy. She doesn't really like crowds. She's going through something right now. She made it sound like I was fragile. Or cold. Or both. What she didn't say, what she'd never admit, was that they hadn't invited me. That they had planned a massive event for my sister and decided I wasn't welcome. That they were upset not because I had hidden something, but because they weren't in control of how it was shared. About a week after Tessa posted the picture, I received an invitation in the mail. Not to an event. To lunch. Handwritten by my mother. It was short. Carefully worded. I think we should talk. Just the two of us. I'm sure we've had some misunderstandings, but I don't want any bad blood between us. Let's meet for lunch next Sunday. Love, Mom. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I sat on the floor of my apartment, the invitation in my hand, and thought about the last time my mom had asked to meet just the two of us. It was 6 years ago. That time, she'd invited me to brunch under the pretense of wanting to reconnect. I had shown up early. She arrived late, with Alara. The conversation had been one long monologue about Alara's new boyfriend, her hopes for the future, her journey. I barely spoke 10 words that entire hour. At the end, my mom gave me a side hug and said, "We should do this more often," like it had been some intimate bonding moment. I never brought it up. I just stopped saying yes. So no, I didn't rush to accept this new invitation. But something in me knew I couldn't avoid it forever. The pressure was building. The messages from extended family were getting more direct. People were noticing. I didn't RSVP to the lunch. Not formally, anyway. I didn't text, call, or write back. But I did show up. The place my mom chose was one of those quiet cafes tucked away on a side street. The kind of place that looks cozy on the outside, but is polished and calculated inside. She liked it because the menu had just enough French words on it to impress people and just enough familiar items to avoid discomfort. I arrived 5 minutes early and asked the hostess if a reservation had been made under Janice. She gave me a tight smile and pointed to the corner window table. There she was, already seated, already sipping something warm, already looking around like she was assessing who might be watching. I walked over. She stood just enough to lean in for a hug, which I allowed, but didn't return fully. She smelled the same as always, expensive perfume and lavender hand cream. It reminded me of every holiday dinner, every forced smile, every moment I stood just to the side of the spotlight. "Raylan," she said softly, like I was a skittish animal. I sat down without a word. She gave a tiny sigh, folded her napkin across her lap, and gestured to the waiter. "We'll need a few more minutes, thank you." We stared at each other for a moment. She was the first to speak. "I'm glad you came," she said. "I was worried you'd ignore me." I raised an eyebrow, like I was ignored. Her mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. Not quite guilt. Just the reflex of someone who's been caught, but thinks they still have control. "Let's not do this," she said gently. "This isn't about blame." "No," I said, voice steady. "It's about patterns." That threw her for a second. She straightened her posture and folded her hands together. "Raylan, this situation with the award, the party, all of it, it's been blown out of proportion. It was never meant to hurt you." "But it did," I said flatly. Her lips pressed together. "I understand you feel that way." I almost laughed. "You feel that way." The safest phrase in her vocabulary. The one she used to escape taking responsibility while pretending to offer empathy. She went on. "We didn't think you'd want to come. You've been distant for months. You skipped Alara's last birthday. Because I wasn't feeling well. Well, we didn't know that, she replied, too quickly. You didn't communicate. I've been communicating my entire life, I said calmly. You just weren't listening. She blinked. For a moment, the mask slipped. I came here, I continued, because I think you deserve to know how intentional this all feels. You didn't forget to invite me. You excluded me. And now that people are asking questions, now that it's affecting the family image, you suddenly want to make peace. Mom's eyes narrowed, just slightly. There's no need to be dramatic. There it was. There it always was. My voice, my pain, my entire experience, reduced to drama. I'm not angry anymore, I said. But I am done. Her head tilted. She was trying to decide how much of this was salvageable. Raylan, I don't think you understand how difficult this has been for me too. That sentence, more than anything, told me everything I needed to know. I stood up. The waiter returned just as I was grabbing my coat. He looked confused. I won't be staying, I told him. Thank you. Mom opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off with a single sentence. You'll hear from me soon. And I left. A few days passed before I reached out to anyone. I needed space to think, to plan. Because I wasn't going to make a scene. I wasn't going to yell or storm in demanding recognition. That would only validate the narrative they already believed, that I was bitter, jealous, ungrateful. No, if they wanted me quiet and polite, I'd give them quiet. But polite? Not anymore. I started with my extended family, the ones who had messaged me after Tessa's post, confused and concerned. I wrote them individually, with care. I explained, in calm and precise language, that I had been left out of my sister's celebration, that it wasn't a scheduling mistake, that I had never received an invitation or even a heads up, that when I asked, I was told, verbatim, that my presence wasn't expected. And then I included a copy of the photo from the award ceremony. Not the one Tessa posted. A new one. The official one from the event photographer. Me on stage, holding the award, backlit by soft lights. The expression on my face wasn't just pride, it was peace. I told them I hadn't hidden it from the family. I simply hadn't gotten a chance to share it. Most of the replies came within the hour. Cousin Lana wrote, I'm so sorry, Ray. I had no idea. That's completely unfair. Aunt Marla said, your mom made it sound like you were the one pulling away. Uncle Felix, who hadn't spoken to me since last Christmas, replied with a long message that ended in, this should have been celebrated. Properly. Publicly. I'm sorry we weren't there. I didn't want sympathy. I wanted truth. And now, at least, some people were beginning to see it. But the real move was still coming. You see, what my parents, and Alara, had never understood was that I wasn't working in silence because I lacked ambition. I wasn't private because I had nothing to share. I was building something. And they never bothered to ask. The education initiative I had helped design? It wasn't just a side project. It had recently secured a massive grant, one that required me to step into a new role overseeing its national expansion. In less than a month, I'd be moving across the country. Not just for work, for good. And they didn't know yet. But they would. Because the board I was joining, a national nonprofit focused on equitable access to education, was hosting an open conference that upcoming month. Hundreds of people, panels, speakers, press, and I had been asked to be the keynote speaker. The topic? The cost of silence. What happens when quiet work is ignored? When I got the email confirming it, I sat at my desk in stunned silence for nearly 5 minutes. Then I smiled, because I knew exactly who I'd be inviting. The morning of the conference, I stood in front of the mirror longer than I needed to. The dress I wore was simple, navy blue, with a sharp collar and sleeves that framed my arms just enough to feel powerful. My hair was pulled back the way I always did it when I needed to feel composed. Not glamorous, not flashy, just certain of who I was, what I'd done, and where I was going. I hadn't told many people I'd be speaking at the event. Just Tessa, my supervisor, and, a few weeks prior, I'd sent carefully written invitations to a small group of family members. Aunts, uncles, cousins, and yes, my parents and Alara. Each envelope contained a ticket, the date and time of the conference, and a small handwritten note from me. I wanted you to hear this in person. No more guessing. No more silence. I'll be speaking at 10:30 a.m., Room B. If you come, just listen. I didn't ask for a reply. I didn't need one. The event was larger than I expected. Hundreds of attendees, all filtering through the polished halls of the conference center, wearing lanyards, shaking hands, exchanging business cards. There was a quiet energy in the air, the kind that came from knowing that most of us were here because we believed in something more than just a paycheck. As the keynote hour approached, I took my place behind the curtain beside the stage. The host introduced me with a brief summary of my background, nonprofit leadership, education access, national grants, and then gestured for me to step forward. I didn't look at the crowd right away, not until I had reached the podium and adjusted the microphone. Then, slowly, I let my eyes scan the room. And there they were, my mom, sitting rigidly near the aisle in a pale blouse and pearl earrings, her expression unreadable. My dad beside her, hands clasped in his lap, eyes lowered like he already knew he didn't want to look me in the eye. And Alara, 2 rows back, arms crossed, her mouth set in a faint smirk, like she couldn't decide whether to be annoyed or bored. I didn't flinch. I began. "My name is Raylan Ford," I said, voice steady. "And for most of my life, I've been quiet." A few people leaned forward, intrigued. I don't mean shy. I mean quiet in the way that people often assume means invisible. I did well in school, but I didn't ask for applause. I built a career in education advocacy, but I didn't send out newsletters. I stayed out of the spotlight because I believed the work mattered more than the recognition. Pause. And for a while, I convinced myself that was enough. The room was still. I come from a family where being loud was seen as confidence, where taking up space was rewarded, and where quiet effort, silent, persistent work was often overlooked. Not because it lacked value, but because it lacked spectacle. I let that hang in the air. And then I told them about the project, about the 5-year effort to expand digital access to underserved schools, about the meetings, the setbacks, the eventual breakthrough. I spoke plainly, carefully, letting the story build. Not dramatic, just true. Then I told them about the award, the ceremony, how I stood on stage holding that glass trophy. Not a single member of my family in the audience. Not because they didn't care, or so they'd say, but because they hadn't been told. Because, I said, no one had asked. A few murmurs in the crowd. I continued. I was left out of a celebration recently. A family event. Because someone decided I wouldn't show up. That I wouldn't matter in the pictures. That my presence might somehow disrupt the narrative. I paused again. And then, softly. And they were right. A hush fell over the room. Because I didn't show up to be decorative. I didn't show up to blend into the background. I came here to speak. To lead. To share what I know with the next generation of leaders. And to remind anyone else who's ever been quietly working in the shadows that your value doesn't depend on someone else's recognition. I ended with quiet strength. No applause cue. No flashy quote. Just the truth. Then I stepped away from the podium and returned to the hallway behind the curtain. When I emerged 10 minutes later, the crowd was still filtering out. And that's when I saw my mom standing by the exit, arms folded tightly across her chest. She didn't say anything. Neither did my dad. Alara glanced over but looked away almost immediately, pulling out her phone as if the floor might swallow her whole if she made eye contact. I walked past them without stopping. Not out of spite. Out of peace. That was 6 months ago. They never reached out again. No apology. No explanation. Just a silence that felt very different than the one I'd grown up with. This silence wasn't mine to carry. It was theirs. Because now they were the ones without access. Without the whole story. Without me. I moved across the country 2 weeks after the conference, into a quiet apartment overlooking a lake. Tessa came to help me settle in. My work now takes me to different states, different schools, different rooms filled with people who actually listen when I speak. I still get the occasional text from distant cousins, usually kind, often curious. I reply to most. I keep the door cracked just enough for those who were never part of the harm. But my parents? Alara? They are not invited in. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It's success. It's peace. It's no longer needing anything from people who were never willing to give it. So that's where I am now. No longer quiet because I feel small, but quiet because I've learned that my voice, my time, and my presence are worth more than just being included in someone else's story. Now, I write my own. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments. If you like this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this. When my parents co-signed a loan to help my sister open a cafe, I was living out of my car. They knew, said nothing. At Thanksgiving, My mom smiled and said, "At least one of our kids made us proud." I just stood, smiled, and said, "Thanks for the clarity." 2 weeks later, they got a letter that changed everything. I'm Michael, 38 years old. For the last 6 months, I've been living out of my car. I've never been one to ask for handouts or pity, but life has a way of throwing curveballs that knock you off your feet. I lost my job at a small tech firm last fall. It wasn't spectacular money, but it was steady, and I thought it would carry me through until something better came along. It didn't. I drained my savings trying to keep a roof over my head and some semblance of normalcy. Rent was late, bills piled up, and slowly, I was pushed out. The day I realized I wouldn't have a place to come home to, I packed what I could into my car. I figured I'd figure it out. Here's the thing. I never once asked my parents for money. I never said, "Hey, I'm struggling. Can you help me out?" Instead, I dropped subtle hints during family calls. I talked about my job hunt, how tough things were, and how I was trying to manage. They knew, but they never offered. Not a penny. Not even a spare bed to crash on for a night or two. Meanwhile, my younger sister, Jess, 32, was having the time of her life opening a cafe in the city. A trendy little spot with artisanal coffee and homemade pastries. You've probably heard of places like that. The kind where Instagrammers camp out all day. What made it worse was that my parents had co-signed the loan for her business. The paperwork had her name on it, but I knew full well my parents were the real financial backstop. They helped her with marketing, gave advice, and threw a big opening party that was all over social media. Jess and I had never been close growing up. She's always been more charismatic and outgoing, while I was more reserved. But I never imagined my own parents would treat us so differently as adults. I want to take you back to the weeks leading up to Thanksgiving, because that's when things really came to a head. I've been living in my car for about 4 months at that point. I parked mostly at friends' places or discreet spots downtown. I showered at the gym and ate whatever I could afford or scrounge up. It wasn't glamorous, but I kept a job search going. One Sunday evening, I got a call from my mom. I was surprised because she rarely called me directly. Usually, Jess or one of my cousins would check in on me. "Michael," she said, voice warm but with that familiar underlying tension. "We're all coming to Thanksgiving at the house this year. Jess really wants you there." I hesitated. I knew they probably had no idea I was living in my car. Or maybe they did and just didn't care. I debated telling them, but I figured it wouldn't change anything. "Okay," I said quietly. "I'll be there." Thanksgiving Day arrived, and as I drove to my parents' house, I rehearsed what I might say. Maybe I'd drop the truth and casually hope for some support. Maybe I'd just keep it quiet and observe. The house smelled like roasting turkey and pumpkin pie the moment I walked in. My sister was there, of course, laughing, showing off pictures of the cafe on her phone, and chatting with my dad about the new espresso machine she'd bought. Mom greeted me with a tight smile. "You look well," she said, but her eyes didn't quite reach mine. Dinner was served, and as usual, Jess dominated the conversation. She talked about her grand plans for expanding the cafe, new hires, and even a possible second location. My parents hung on every word, nodding and smiling proudly. After the third glass of sparkling cider, my mom turned to me. The house quieted a bit, everyone sensing something was coming. She smiled and said, almost casually, "At least one of our kids made us proud." The room went silent. My chest tightened. For a moment, I considered walking out. I smiled. "Thanks for the clarity," I said softly. No one said anything after that. No apology, no explanation. Just an awkward pause before the conversation resumed. I left early that night, heart heavier than it had been in months. Driving back to my car, I thought about how my parents could look me in the eye and say that. How they could cheer for Jess while I was barely surviving. But then, 2 weeks later, everything changed. I got a call from my cousin Lisa, someone I trusted. She said my parents had received a letter. It was from the bank. Apparently, something about Jess's cafe loan had gone sideways. I don't know all the details yet, but the letter hinted at financial trouble that might pull my parents into a mess they hadn't expected. I didn't want to get my hopes up, but maybe, just maybe, this was the turning point. After Lisa's call, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. On one hand, here was something tangible, something that might shake up the status quo. On the other, I was painfully aware that any financial trouble involving Jess's cafe loan could drag my parents into a mess that might only worsen family tensions. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I also knew better than to expect sympathy or support from my parents. They had already made their feelings clear, so I had to tread carefully. It was a few days after Lisa's call when I got invited, more like summoned, to another family dinner. My parents still owned the big house in the suburbs, the same one where Jess and I had grown up. Despite my circumstances, I tried not to let that keep me from attending family events, even if I went with a tight knot in my stomach. I showed up a little earlier than usual, hoping to catch a moment with my mom or dad. Jess was already there, sitting at the kitchen island, scrolling on her phone with that confident smile I'd seen countless times before. Mom was in the living room, flipping through a magazine, looking as polished as ever. Dad was outside in the garage, tinkering with his old car, humming a little tune to himself. I cleared my throat, trying to break the ice. "Hey, Mom," I said, keeping my voice steady. She glanced up, nodded slightly, then returned her attention to the pages. I tried Dad next. "Hey, Dad, need any help with that?" He looked up, wiping his hands on a rag. "Nah, Michael. Just fine. But thanks." That was all. No follow-up, no questions about me. Just the usual polite distance. Once everyone gathered at the table, the mood was lighter than Thanksgiving, but I could still sense an undercurrent of something unspoken. Jess seemed unusually quiet. Her usual bubbly chatter was reduced to short answers and forced smiles. I caught Mom giving her these little glances, worried but trying to hide it behind calm composure. Halfway through the meal, Dad cleared his throat and said, "There's something we need to talk about." That got everyone's attention. Jess stiffened. Mom looked surprised, her fork pausing midair. Dad continued, "We got a letter from the bank. It's about the cafe loan." The air grew thick. My heart beat faster. I'd been expecting this, but hearing it out loud was different. Mom tried to sound casual, but the tremor in her voice gave her away. "What exactly does it say?" Dad passed the letter across the table to Mom, who scanned it quickly. I leaned in to catch a glimpse of the words: delinquency, missed payments, potential foreclosure. Jess's face went pale. I saw her jaw tighten, hands gripping the table edge. "I don't know how this happened," she said quietly. "I've been making the payments every month." Mom exchanged a look with Dad. "Jess, the bank says you missed the last two." Jess shook her head, denial flickering in her eyes. "No, that's not possible." That evening felt like watching a slow-motion collapse. Jess, the picture of confidence and success, was unraveling. My parents, who had spent years championing her ambitions, were now trapped in confusion and fear. And me? I was somewhere in the background, invisible but watching everything. I wanted to speak up, to say something helpful, but my voice caught in my throat. "Maybe we should check the bank statements again," I suggested finally, trying to keep it neutral. Dad nodded. "That's the plan tomorrow." Jess gave me a brief, almost thankful look before excusing herself. She said she needed fresh air and disappeared into the backyard. After the others had gone to bed, I sat with Mom in the living room. She looked exhausted, like years of tension had finally caught up. "I don't understand it, Michael," she said softly. "Jess has always been careful with money." I nodded. "Sometimes things get missed. Bills can get lost or overlooked. It doesn't mean she's irresponsible." Mom sighed. "I just hate that this is happening. And the worst part is, we didn't know what you've been going through." I stared at her. "You knew I was struggling, Mom. You just never said anything." She looked away, biting her lip. "I guess we didn't want to make things harder." I shook my head slowly. Ignoring me didn't help. There was a long silence between us. I wanted to believe she meant what she said, but the hurt was still there. Over the next few days, the family was caught up in trying to get to the bottom of the loan issue. Mom and Dad spent hours on the phone with the bank. Jess was frantic, going through receipts and bank statements in a blur of stress. One afternoon, I was at the cafe, trying to help with some basic tasks since Jess was running around in a panic. The place looked busy, but there was a tension in the air that I hadn't noticed before. The regular customers were friendly, but I could tell Jess's mind was elsewhere. She confided in me quietly as she wiped down tables. "I'm afraid this might be more than a simple mispayment." I looked at her, waiting for her to explain. She hesitated. "There might have been some errors in bookkeeping. Maybe even someone taking advantage behind the scenes." That hit me like a thunderclap. Jess, who had always been so careful, might have been blindsided by someone she trusted. Or worse, someone she didn't even suspect. When I went home that night, my mind was spinning. I realized the story I thought I knew of my sister's success, my parents' pride, and my own silence was only part of the picture. There were things going on beneath the surface, things nobody had said aloud. The next day at dinner, Jess finally broke down. She told us about an employee she'd recently hired to help with finances, someone who had access to the bank account. She suspected this person might have been embezzling money. Mom and Dad were stunned. I could see the guilt in their eyes. They had trusted Jess's choices blindly. They had co-signed a loan without fully understanding the risks. And me? I was suddenly not just the failed son living in his car, but someone who knew the whole story, who had the pieces to connect the dots. That night, I stayed up late, thinking. I knew I had to do something. This was my chance, not just to help Jess and my parents, but to finally be part of the family again in a meaningful way. I pulled out my laptop and started digging through the little records I'd managed to keep, trying to see if there was anything useful that could help unravel the financial mess. That's when I noticed something strange, some transactions that didn't add up, some invoices that were duplicates, and a trail of payments going to an unfamiliar name. It was small, almost invisible, but it was enough to start an investigation. The night I stayed up poring over those financial records was one of the longest nights I've had in years. My car was parked outside a 24-hour diner, the hum of late-night traffic outside the windows keeping me awake. My laptop screen cast a pale glow in the darkness as I clicked through the spreadsheets, bank statements, and invoices I'd managed to gather. I'd been so consumed with trying to keep my own life together that I hadn't paid close attention to the finer details of Jess's cafe's finances. But now, seeing these inconsistencies, the pieces started to come together. The duplicate payments, the suspicious vendor names that didn't ring any bells, and the unexplained transfers. Someone was siphoning money, quietly and methodically. What I wasn't sure about was how to bring it up. I'd been invisible to my parents and Jess for so long, I worried I wouldn't be taken seriously. Or worse, that it would deepen the family divide. But then, I thought about the alternative, doing nothing and watching the place I used to think of as Jess's success crumble under the weight of deception and neglect. And perhaps, more importantly, letting my parents suffer because of their blind trust. I typed out a message to Jess, asking if we could meet tomorrow to talk. I kept it vague, wanting to gauge her reaction without overwhelming her. She replied almost immediately, agreeing to meet early afternoon. The next day, I arrived early and waited outside the cafe. The morning rush was just settling down, and the smell of fresh coffee and baked goods drifted out the open door. Jess was already inside, wiping down the counter with her usual efficiency, but her face looked tired. Lines I hadn't seen before had started to appear around her eyes. When she saw me, she gave a small smile, clearly relieved to have some company in this mess. We sat at a small table near the window, the noise of customers and clinking cups surrounding us, but inside that moment, it felt like it was just the two of us. I took a deep breath and said, Jess, I've been looking over some of the financial stuff, and I think there might be more going on than just missed payments. She looked at me, the worry deepening. What do you mean? I pulled out my laptop and showed her the records I'd compiled. See these transactions here? They don't match up with any vendors or expenses I know about. Some of the invoices are duplicates, and there are payments going to a name I've never heard before. Her brow furrowed as she scanned the screen. That's not possible. I trusted everyone I hired. Sometimes the people closest to us take advantage without us realizing, I said carefully. I think someone might be embezzling money. Jess sat back, the weight of the realization hitting her hard. No wonder the bank is after us. If money was disappearing behind the scenes, I wouldn't have known. I reached out and placed a hand on hers. We're going to fix this. But we need to be careful. If this gets out the wrong way, it could destroy everything. She nodded, grateful but scared. Deciding to tell Mom and Dad was harder than I imagined. I kept replaying the last time I'd spoken to them, the way Mom had dismissed me, the way Dad had barely looked at me. But Jess insisted. They need to know, Michael. If we're going to fix this, we have to do it together. So that evening, we sat down with them again. Mom looked tired, her shoulders slumped, and Dad seemed unusually quiet. I started by saying, there's something important we've discovered. Something that explains the loan issues and the missed payments. Mom's eyes widened. What is it? Jess took over. There's been some financial mismanagement. Possibly theft. I've been going over the records, and Michael helped me find suspicious transactions. Dad rubbed his forehead. Are you sure? Yes, I said. I'm confident enough to suggest we get an accountant or forensic auditor to help us uncover what happened. Mom looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time in months, I saw something change in her expression, a flicker of respect, maybe even regret. We should have listened to you sooner, she admitted quietly. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. We brought in a professional to audit the cafe's finances. The results were worse than any of us expected. The employee Jess had hired had been siphoning money for months. More than $30,000 had disappeared. Jess was devastated but determined. She refused to let this be the end of her dream. My parents, meanwhile, were forced to confront the fact that their pride and blind faith had blinded them to reality. And me? For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was truly part of the family again. But the cracks weren't fixed overnight. The tension was still there, simmering beneath the surface. Jess's business was barely holding on, and my parents were stressed about their finances and reputation. One afternoon, I was at the cafe helping Jess when Mom showed up unexpectedly. She looked nervous but resolute. "I want to help," she said simply. "Not just financially, but with the day-to-day stuff. I've been so focused on everything else, I forgot what really matters." Jess looked surprised but pleased. That was when I realized maybe this disaster could be an opportunity, not just to save the cafe, but to rebuild what had been broken between us all. The audit hit like a thunderclap. It wasn't just about the missing money, it was the betrayal that cut the deepest. Jess had trusted the employee completely, and in doing so, had opened the door to months of theft and lies. We sat together one evening in the cramped back office of the cafe, the smell of stale coffee and paper filling the air as Jess held the thick report in her hands. She read through the findings with a mixture of disbelief and quiet fury. "That person took everything we worked for," she said, voice barely above a whisper. Mom, who had joined us after work, sat silently, tears in her eyes. For once, she looked genuinely remorseful, not just for the financial hit, but for how things had played out with me and the family as a whole. I watched them, feeling the shifting tides of family dynamics. The walls that had divided us were starting to crack, and I wasn't sure if it was anger, regret, or the desire to finally unite against a common enemy that was holding us together. I could see how devastated Jess was, but I also saw the kind of fire that only a deep betrayal could spark. She wasn't going to let this go unnoticed. Neither was I. We agreed that the employee, let's call her Laura, needed to be held accountable. But going to the police or threatening legal action right away wasn't an option. Jess's business was fragile, and any scandal could tank it completely. Plus, Laura had quietly disappeared the moment the audit results came back. Instead, Jess and I began to gather what we could, evidence of Laura's misdeeds, discrepancies in documents, photos, timestamps. It was painstaking work. We combed through old invoices, bank transfers, and emails. Every piece of evidence had to be airtight, so that when we were ready, there'd be no doubt. While Jess and I worked on gathering evidence, something unexpected happened with my parents. Mom, especially, started to change. It was like a switch flipped. She stopped avoiding me, even invited me to help with things around the house. Dad, usually more stoic, began to open up about his worries, admitting he'd underestimated the situation. One evening, as we sat around the kitchen table discussing the cafe's future, Mom turned to me and said, "Michael, I'm sorry. For everything. For how we treated you. For not being there when you needed us." I nodded quietly. The apology was overdue, but the sincerity was there. I could feel the slow thawing of years of distance. With the family starting to pull together, Jess and I started planning a way to use the evidence we had to force Laura's hand. We knew she was still out there, somewhere, likely thinking she had gotten away with it. But we also knew her world was smaller than she imagined. We had enough to make a case that could ruin her professionally and maybe even land her in serious legal trouble. Jess wanted to confront her directly, but I cautioned against it. "We need to control the narrative," I said. "If we let anger take over, we lose the upper hand." One afternoon, while running errands near the neighborhood where the cafe was located, I spotted Laura. She was walking briskly down a side street, looking over her shoulder as if she expected someone to follow. My heart raced. I thought about calling Jess or my parents, but decided I had to handle this carefully. I followed her at a distance, keeping to the shadows. She entered a small, run-down apartment building. I didn't want to rush into anything, so I stayed nearby, watching. This was my chance to gather more information, maybe even catch her slipping up. Over the next few days, I quietly documented Laura's movements and interactions. I started noticing patterns, late-night visitors, suspicious phone calls, even trips to the bank. I kept all of this information organized, creating a timeline of her activities that correlated with the missing funds from the cafe. Jess was amazed at how thorough I was. "You're really good at this," she said one night. I shrugged. When you've been invisible for so long, you get used to watching and waiting. Meanwhile, the deeper I dug, the more I realized that Laura wasn't the only one who had betrayed Jess and my parents. I discovered some old emails between Mom and Dad, discussing their own financial struggles that they had never shared with me or Jess. There were mentions of loans, debts, and even warnings from the bank about their credit being at risk because of the co-signed cafe loan. It hit me hard. My parents had risked their own financial security for Jess's dream, while letting me struggle without a word. The bitterness I'd been holding simmered beneath the surface, fueling my resolve to make sure justice was served. With the evidence mounting, Jess and I decided it was time to take action. We prepared a formal letter to Laura, outlining the evidence against her and the consequences she would face if she didn't cooperate. But we weren't going to send it ourselves. Instead, I contacted a private investigator I knew from my tech days. Someone who specialized in tracking down people who thought they could disappear without a trace. The plan was to deliver the letter through official channels, with proof of receipt, so Laura couldn't claim ignorance. On the day the letter was delivered, Jess, Mom, Dad, and I sat in the cafe's back office, waiting. The tension was thick, every phone ring making us jump. Then the call came. Laura had received the letter and wanted to talk. Jess was calm but firm. "This is the conversation we've been waiting for," she said. As the conversation unfolded, I saw something I hadn't seen in years, a chance for my family to unite, not just in anger but in strength and resolve. The call with Laura was scheduled for the next morning. Jess, Mom, Dad, and I gathered in the cafe's back office, the air thick with anticipation. The hum of the espresso machine and muffled chatter outside contrasted sharply with the silence inside. When Laura's voice finally came through the speakerphone, it was cold and guarded. She denied everything at first, claimed the money was part of misunderstandings or business expenses Jess hadn't approved. But we were ready. We calmly laid out the evidence, the duplicated invoices, unexplained bank transfers, timestamps showing she was in 2 places at once, and even surveillance footage we had managed to obtain from the cafe. At first, Laura tried to deflect, but as the facts piled up, her tone shifted. She asked for leniency, hinted she could make amends if we agreed to keep things quiet. Jess didn't hesitate. "You betrayed my trust and nearly destroyed my dream. We're willing to give you a chance, but only if you repay what you owe and resign immediately. No secrecy. This ends now." There was a long pause on the other end. Finally, Laura agreed, reluctantly, but undeniably. She promised to return the stolen funds through a payment plan and handed over all the cafe's financial documents she still had. After that day, things began to change, not just in the cafe, but in our family. Jess threw herself into rebuilding the business with renewed focus. She cut unnecessary expenses, reached out to loyal customers with honesty about the challenges, and slowly regained trust in the community. Mom and Dad stepped up, helping however they could. Mom, especially, became involved in the day-to-day operations, handling inventory and bookkeeping, determined to prevent any future mistakes. Dad repaired the cafe's aging equipment and even started learning about business management. As for me, the invisible son who had been living out of his car just months before, I found my place. I helped with marketing, updated the website, and used my tech skills to improve the cafe's online presence. Slowly but surely, I felt that old sting of isolation fade. At family dinners, the conversation flowed easier. The apologies had been made, but more importantly, actions followed. We were no longer divided by silent resentment, but united by shared purpose. The road wasn't easy. The stolen $30,000 wasn't something Jess could recover overnight. The repayment plan with Laura was slow, and it strained the cafe's already tight cash flow. My parents' financial situation was still precarious. The co-signed loan had put them under pressure, and they had to dip into savings they'd been hoping to use for retirement. But despite the setbacks, there was progress. The bank agreed to restructure the loan based on the new evidence and our commitment to turning things around. Laura followed through on her agreement initially, making payments and cooperating. However, when the payments slowed and communications became sparse, Jess and I worked with the private investigator to track her down again. Eventually, Laura was confronted legally and faced consequences beyond just the cafe's repayment. Civil suits and a criminal investigation began. The community learned of her betrayal, and she lost her professional reputation. About a year later, the cafe is stable. It's not the booming success Jess had dreamed of, but it's sustainable, and there's a genuine sense of pride in what we've all rebuilt together. My parents have started to recover financially, though they are more cautious now about where they put their trust and money. Mom and Dad's relationship with me has strengthened beyond repair, grounded now in honesty and respect. Jess and I, once distant siblings living in entirely different worlds, are partners in this journey. We've learned to communicate, to lean on each other, and to face challenges together. As for me, I've moved into a small apartment nearby. No longer living in my car, I have a routine, a job that matters, and a family that finally feels like home again. What started as a painful series of betrayals, financial, emotional, and familial, turned into an opportunity for all of us to grow and heal. The road was slow, marked by setbacks and tough conversations. But through patience, determination, and a little bit of quiet revenge against the person who tried to destroy Jess's dream, we found a way back to each other. The lesson? Sometimes the hardest battles come from those closest to us, but they can also bring us closer than ever if we're willing to face the truth and fight together. My sister told me I was selfish for taking a vacation, completely ignoring the fact that I had been supporting her financially for months. She didn't expect what happened next, but when the truth came out, she had no choice but to face the consequences. I'm 34, and my sister, Lila, is 31. We've always had a complicated relationship, but in the past couple of years, things have really spiraled. I've been the one to carry the load for her, financially and emotionally, and it's starting to feel like she thinks that's just how things should be. Let me give you some background. It all started when Lila lost her job. She was working at a company she hated, but it was stable, and she was getting a decent paycheck. Then one day, they let her go. No severance, no warning. She called me, completely broken, and I could hear the panic in her voice. She told me she didn't know how she was going to make rent, how she was going to pay for her car, or buy food. I wasn't exactly in a great financial position either, but I didn't want to see her end up on the streets, so I told her I'd help out until she got back on her feet. At first, it was just a couple $100 here and there to cover her rent or her car payment. I didn't think much of it. Family is family, right? But over time, the payments started to increase. It wasn't just rent or her car anymore. She needed money for groceries, for her phone bill, and, eventually, for her therapy sessions, which, I'll admit, I genuinely supported her seeking help for. I was working long hours at my job, and while I wasn't rolling in cash, I did have savings, so I kept giving. It wasn't until 6 months later that I started to notice things weren't adding up. I'd offer advice on how to find a new job, how to budget, and she'd brush it off. Instead, she'd tell me how stressed she was, how she couldn't find anything, and how I was the only person she could rely on. In the meantime, she was posting pictures on social media, out with friends, enjoying dinners at fancy restaurants. Meanwhile, I was struggling to make sure my bills were paid, all while keeping her afloat. I didn't say anything at first. It felt wrong to question her when she was so clearly struggling. But then, the vacation happened. I had been planning a short getaway for months. Just a weekend away in the mountains to recharge. It wasn't a luxury trip, but it was something I needed. I hadn't had a real break in over 2 years, and I was physically and mentally drained from work and supporting Lila. I told her about it a few weeks before I booked the trip, and at first, she seemed happy for me. She even said I deserved it. But that changed the day I bought my tickets. Lila called me in the middle of the day, frantic. "Are you seriously going on a vacation right now? While I'm struggling to pay my bills. How selfish can you be?" she screamed into the phone. I was caught off guard. I knew she was upset, but this was a level I hadn't expected. She went on and on about how I was abandoning her, how I'd been the one to always bail her out, and how now, when she needed me most, I was off having fun without a care in the world. I tried to stay calm and explain. "Lila, this isn't about you. I've been helping you for months now. I need this time for myself. I can't keep running on empty, and you know that." But she wasn't having it. "You're just like everyone else in this family, always putting your needs first. You think you're so much better than me just because you have your life together. Well, not everyone can be perfect." I tried to reason with her, but she was past the point of listening. The whole conversation turned into a guilt trip. In the end, I told her I'd still help her out with her rent that month, but I wasn't going to cancel my plans. That's when things really took a turn. "I don't want your charity," she snapped. "Just go and enjoy your stupid vacation. Maybe you'll come back with some perspective on how to actually care about your family." That was the last straw for me. I ended the call, my head spinning. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me anymore. But I had no idea how much worse things were about to get. I left for my trip a few days later, and as I was on my way to the mountains, I noticed several messages from Lila. All of them were passive-aggressive and upset, accusing me of abandoning her. One message in particular stood out. "Hope your vacation is worth it. I'll just figure it out myself like I always do." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I was finally able to relax and enjoy my trip, but it wasn't long before things took an unexpected turn. I came back after the weekend, planning to catch up on work and recharge. When I opened the door to my apartment, I was met with an unexpected sight. Lila was sitting on the couch, looking furious. I stood there for a moment, confused. "Lila, what are you doing here?" She stood up, arms crossed. "We need to talk." I closed the door behind me and stood there for a moment, trying to process what was going on. I was expecting some sort of, "I'm sorry for how I acted," maybe even a bit of tension as she tried to justify her behavior. But the look on her face wasn't one of someone who had calmed down. No, it was something colder, more calculating. "What's going on, Lila?" I asked cautiously, setting down my bag by the door. She hadn't moved from her spot on the couch. Her arms were still crossed, her posture stiff. "You really think you're entitled to all this?" she asked, her voice cold but tight with anger. I raised an eyebrow, taken aback. "Entitled to what?" "Everything," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "You think you can just disappear for a weekend while I'm over here drowning in debt, and I'm supposed to just accept it?" I felt my stomach drop. This wasn't just about me going on a vacation anymore. She was really angry, and it seemed like she was lashing out at everything I had done for her. "I've been helping you, Lila. I've been sending you money, covering your bills. What more do you want from me?" My voice had risen without me realizing, but it felt like I needed to make her understand, make her see how much I had sacrificed for her. Lila's lips curled into a bitter smile. "It's not enough, though, is it? You give me a little here and there, but it's never about what I need, is it? You're just doing it to make yourself feel better, to show everyone how generous you are." My head spun. "That's not what this is about at all. You think I'm doing this for me? I'm doing this because you're my sister, and I love you. I want to see you stand on your own 2 feet." She shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her. "You think I don't know that? But you're not helping me stand on my own feet. You're keeping me stuck. Every time I take one step forward, you pull me back with your help, and you act like it's a favor. You don't see me as an equal anymore. You think you know better." My heart sank, because in that moment, I knew she was right. I had been trying to help, but I hadn't really thought about how it might be affecting her. I hadn't seen it from her perspective. Maybe I had been unintentionally holding her back by always swooping in to save the day. Maybe I had become part of the problem instead of the solution. "I never meant to make you feel like that," I said quietly, my voice faltering as the weight of her words settled in. "But I can't just keep giving without a plan, Lila. You have to take responsibility for yourself, too." Her expression darkened, and she stood up abruptly, pacing in front of me. "I am taking responsibility. I'm trying. But you don't get it. You have everything I don't. A stable job, a nice apartment, friends who actually respect you. You think you've earned all that, but it's easier when you don't have to struggle the way I do. I've worked hard for what I have," I said, my own frustration creeping in. "But I'm not saying I'm better than you. I'm not. I just don't know what you want me to do anymore. You keep saying I'm the problem, but I'm just trying to help." She stared at me for a long moment, her eyes searching mine like she was trying to figure out if I was being sincere. Then, suddenly, she let out a harsh laugh. "I know exactly what you want," she said, her voice suddenly quiet. "You want me to be just like you. You want me to get a job, pay my bills, and make my life look perfect so you can be proud of me. But that's not me. You don't get to control me." The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. Was that what I had been doing all along? Trying to shape her into someone she wasn't? Was I more concerned about how she made me look than about actually supporting her for who she was? I felt a rush of guilt flood through me. "I never wanted to control you, Lila. I stopped, swallowing hard. I didn't know how to say what I was really feeling. I just wanted to help you find your way. I don't need you to be like me. I need you to be okay. But you have to help yourself, too. She narrowed her eyes, clearly unconvinced. For a moment, there was a heavy silence between us. I could feel the distance growing wider with every passing second. Then, almost as if on cue, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen before answering it without hesitation. "Yeah," she said, her tone shifting to something sharp and impatient. I couldn't make out the words on the other end of the line, but the way she was standing there, arms still crossed, her jaw clenched, told me it was something serious. I waited, feeling that strange, gnawing feeling in my stomach as I watched her listen, her face hardening with every word. "Yeah, I'll figure it out," she muttered before hanging up and turning back to me. "I have some things to take care of, but I'm not done with this conversation." I nodded silently, not knowing what to say anymore. But it was clear things weren't going to settle anytime soon. She was upset, and I was too, but neither of us knew how to bridge the gap that had grown between us. She walked toward the door, and just before she left, she turned to me one last time. "You're not the only one who can make decisions, you know," she said, her voice low, but with a sharp edge. "I don't need your pity or your help anymore. I'll figure things out my way." And with that, she walked out, leaving me standing there in the middle of my apartment, unsure of what to do next. The silence in the apartment was deafening after Lila left. I stood there, still processing everything she'd said, and my mind was a jumble of conflicting thoughts. Was I really controlling her? Was my helping actually doing more harm than good? It was a question I couldn't easily answer, and the more I thought about it, the more guilt crept in. But at the same time, there was this undeniable feeling that she wasn't being entirely fair to me either. I had been there for her, financially, emotionally. I'd kept my distance in terms of trying to run her life, but that wasn't enough. I thought about how she'd been behaving, how she never really seemed to take any of my advice, how I had just become the bank to her problems. It made my stomach churn. Maybe I had been a little too eager to help, but it didn't feel like it was ever really about her trying to help herself. Over the next few days, Lila kept her distance. I didn't reach out either. I didn't know how to fix what felt broken between us. I tried to understand her side of things, but I wasn't sure she wanted to understand mine. Then, the next Monday, things took an unexpected turn. I was at work when I got an email from the building management company. It was a standard message telling me to check my account for updates, but when I logged in, my heart stopped. There was a late fee on my rent. I had never been late before. I double-checked the payment history, and everything seemed normal until I noticed the payment for that month hadn't gone through. I checked my bank statement, and that's when I saw it. The money I'd sent to Lila the previous week, money I thought was for her rent, had been taken from my account, and it was now missing. I froze for a moment, confused. Then, a horrible thought crept into my mind. I rushed to my phone and dialed her number, praying I was wrong. It went straight to voicemail. I left a quick message, my voice trembling with a mix of disbelief and frustration. "Lila, what did you do? I just saw the payment didn't go through. I sent you money for your rent. Did you use it for something else?" I waited and waited, but there was no response. By the time I got home that night, I was already on edge, the frustration gnawing at me. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but my mind kept circling back to what had happened the past few days. The way she'd snapped at me, the way she'd walked out of my apartment with that cutting remark. It felt like she was pushing me away on purpose, like she was trying to make me out to be the villain in her story. But now, I wasn't so sure who the real villain was. I decided to go over to her apartment. I had to know what happened to the money. This wasn't about just a few $100 anymore. It was about trust. And if she had taken it without telling me, if she'd lied about needing help to cover her expenses, I was done. This would be the final straw. I rang her doorbell, but there was no answer. I knocked. Nothing. After a few minutes, I decided to text her. "I need to talk to you about the money I sent you. It didn't go through. Can you call me back?" Still no reply. I was starting to feel that sick feeling again, the one where you know something's off but can't quite prove it yet. But something told me I had to keep pushing. I wasn't about to just let this slide. not when I'd been more than generous with her. So, I did something I hated doing. I called our mother. I didn't want to bring her into this mess, but I was starting to feel like I had no other choice. "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Have you heard from Lila? I'm trying to get a hold of her, but she won't respond to me." There was a long pause on the other end. "Lila? What's going on?" "I don't know," I said, frustrated. "I sent her money last week for her rent, and now I see that it didn't go through. I think she might have used it for something else." Mom sighed. "Lila hasn't been in touch with me much lately. She's been, well, she's been going through something. But you know how she is. She doesn't always know what's best for her." That didn't sit well with me. It felt like she was brushing off the situation, like she wasn't taking it seriously. And that just made me more upset. "I'm not trying to control her, Mom. I'm just trying to make sure she's okay." "But she won't even talk to me now." I heard Mom sigh again, more sharply this time. "I can't get involved in your fights with your sister. You know that." Her words stung more than they should have. I had expected at least a little support, but it seemed like she was siding with Lila, or maybe just avoiding conflict altogether. The truth was, I was getting tired of being the one to carry the load, emotionally and financially, for both Lila and, sometimes, my mother. I hung up feeling more isolated than before. I wasn't sure how I was supposed to handle this. What was I supposed to do when the person I had helped and supported for so long was now acting like I was the one who had wronged them? The next morning, as I was going through my emails, I saw something that made my blood run cold. It was an email from the landlord of the building Lila lived in. It was a rent reminder. But this one was different from the others. The subject line said, "Your sister's outstanding balance." I clicked it open and read the email, trying to make sense of it. Apparently, Lila hadn't paid her rent for the past 2 months. I knew she was struggling, but she'd never mentioned being this far behind. The email wasn't a simple reminder. It was a final warning. If the balance wasn't cleared, they were starting eviction proceedings. I sat there staring at the email, trying to make sense of it all. This wasn't just about money anymore. It wasn't just about her not paying her bills. It was about the trust one had given her, the belief that she'd start to get her life together. And instead, she had been using me as a safety net without even telling me the full truth. My first instinct was to call her again, but I knew it would be pointless. I hadn't heard from her since our last confrontation, and the silence from her end was becoming deafening. I had no idea what to do next. I had been so wrapped up in trying to fix things for her, to get her to stand on her own 2 feet, that I had missed how far gone things had become. I decided to go over to her apartment again, but this time, I had a different plan. I wasn't going to beg her to talk to me. I wasn't going to offer her more money. I was done trying to fix things for her. I stood in front of her door, and as soon as she opened it, the conversation picked up right where we left off. "You need to listen to me," I said firmly, not giving her a chance to shut me out again. "I got an email this morning from your landlord. You haven't paid rent for 2 months. How could you let that happen?" Her eyes flickered with surprise, but then quickly masked it with anger. "What are you talking about? I paid the rent last month. I've been paying it." I felt my anger flare. "You've been paying your rent with the money I sent you, Lila. You've been lying to me, and now look where it's gotten us. You're about to be evicted, and I'm done being your backup plan." Her face twisted in frustration, and she stepped back, crossing her arms. "I didn't lie to you. I've had other expenses to deal with, okay? You're acting like I'm some kind of failure. Just leave me alone." "No, Lila," I said, my voice steady, even though I could feel the heat rising in my chest. "I've been helping you, but you've never respected me. You've been using me to avoid facing the consequences of your own mistakes, and I won't stand for it anymore." For a moment, she didn't say anything. Her eyes shifted uncomfortably as if she was looking for something to say, but she didn't have the words. And then she spoke. "Maybe I've been using you," she said, her voice cold now. "But you know what? I never asked for your help. You're the one who insists on giving it. You're the one who thinks you know what's best for me. So don't act like I owe you something. I don't." I stood there, completely stunned. I had never heard her talk to me like this before. She'd always been defensive, but this felt different. This felt like pure venom. "I don't owe you anything," she repeated, her tone sharp. It hit me like a wave. All this time, I'd been trying to help her, to be there for her, to pick up the pieces when she couldn't. But in the end, she had never truly appreciated it. She'd been using me as a crutch, and now, when everything was falling apart, she was blaming me for it. I felt a deep ache in my chest, not just from the words she was throwing at me, but from the realization that I was never going to get the relationship I wanted with her. I'd spent so long trying to be the sister who could fix things, who could help, but now I was seeing her for what she really was: entitled, manipulative, and completely unwilling to take responsibility for her own choices. "I'm done," I said quietly, finally letting the words sink in. "I can't keep doing this. I've given you everything I can, and I can't keep saving you from the mess you make. If you want to fix your life, you have to do it on your own. I'm not your safety net anymore." For a moment, she didn't respond. Her face was a mask of rage, but beneath it, I could see a flicker of fear. She knew what I was saying. She knew I meant it. And as much as I hated it, I knew I had to follow through. "I'm leaving," I added, turning toward the door. "I hope you figure things out, Lila. But don't expect me to bail you out again." I walked out of her apartment, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe again. It wasn't the feeling of relief I'd expected, though. There was no closure, no satisfaction. Just the painful recognition that I had been right all along, that my sister was never going to change. Right now, things are at a standstill. I've cut ties with Lila. After everything that happened, I realized that I couldn't keep enabling her or being the one to pick up the pieces every time she made a mistake. I'm still processing the whole situation, and honestly, it's been really tough. I've always tried to be there for her, but she never really seemed to care about the effort I put in. The more I helped, the more entitled and manipulative she became. Since I walked away, I haven't heard from her at all. I don't know if she's dealing with the fallout of the rent situation or if she's just trying to figure things out on her own. I'm kind of in limbo right now. Part of me wants to check in and see if she's okay, but the other part of me feels like I've done enough, and it's time for her to handle her own problems. The family is aware of what happened, but they're not taking sides. Mom just tells me that Lila's going through a phase and that I should be patient, but that's not something I can keep hearing. It feels like they're all waiting for me to go back to being the one who fixes everything, but I'm not sure I'm willing to anymore. I don't know if I'm the a-hole for cutting her off, or if I'm finally just doing what I should have done a long time ago. But I can't keep being her punching bag. What do you think? Am I the a-hole for walking away from my sister after everything? If you found this story interesting and want more content like this, make sure to like and subscribe. Don't forget to drop a comment below with your thoughts. Do you think the sister was in the wrong, or was it time to cut ties? Hey everyone, I'm 32F, and what I'm about to share has been eating at me for weeks. I've tried letting it go, telling myself to move on, but honestly, the sheer entitlement, manipulation, and smug cruelty I experienced at the hands of my own family, people I bent over backwards to help, deserve to be written down, if for no other reason than to get it out of my system. To give some context, I'll start with a bit of family history. I grew up in a pretty average middle-class household in the Midwest. My mom was a nurse, my dad worked for the city's sanitation department, and I was an only child. My cousin Leona, 31F, and her mom, Aunt Rhea, were a constant presence in our lives. They moved in with us when I was about 10. My uncle had left them with nothing but debt, and my parents, being the kind of people who'd offer the shirts off their backs, opened our home to them without hesitation. We converted our modest basement into a shared bedroom for me and Leona. It wasn't glamorous, but we made it work. For the next 7 years, we were inseparable. Leona and I went through school together, dealt with awkward teen years together, cried over heartbreaks together. She was like a sister to me. Maybe that's why what happened stings more than anything I've experienced in my adult life. Leona always had big dreams. She wanted out of our small town. She was smart, ambitious, and driven, someone you couldn't help but root for. When she got into a state university on a partial scholarship, everyone was proud. I remember staying up late helping her apply for extra aid and editing her essays. I even gave her some of my savings to help her afford her books the first semester. She came back after graduating with a business degree, head high and voice sharper than I remembered. And with her came Kellen, her boyfriend at the time, now her husband. Kellen was charming, I guess, if you didn't look too closely. He had that polished way of talking that made people think he knew what he was doing. But beneath the surface, it always felt like he was trying too hard to convince everyone he was the smartest man in the room. He talked in phrases he clearly picked up from business podcasts and self-help books, and he never missed a chance to name-drop people he claimed to know. I never fully trusted him. He'd make comments that stung more than they should have, like how some people just aren't built for big things, or how my job at a local credit union was noble in a community kind of way, always with that smug little smile. Still, Leona was smitten. She said he had big ideas, and she wanted to build a life with someone who aimed high. So, despite reservations, I smiled through the engagement and stood by her side at their wedding. Now, here's where it gets more complicated. About a year into their marriage, they started talking about buying a house. The problem? Kellen's ventures never really took off. He bounced between startups and consulting gigs, but didn't bring in much income. Leona was working for a logistics company, decent pay, but not enough for the kind of house they wanted. They approached me privately one evening after dinner at my parents' house. They were warm, almost nervous, especially Leona. She told me the bank needed stronger credit to approve their mortgage. They had a little saved for the down payment, but they needed someone to co-sign. Just for a while, she said. Just until they could refinance in their own names. I hesitated. I had just finished paying off my student loans and was finally seeing a future where I could buy my own place. I wasn't wealthy by any means, but my credit was good, and I had a stable job. Leona must have sensed my reluctance because she reached for my hand and said, "You know I'd do this for you in a heartbeat." And then came Aunt Rhea. She showed up at my place the next night with a photo album from when we were kids. She sat at my kitchen table flipping through pages, reminding me of everything my family did for them back then. She wasn't angry, just deeply disappointed, in that heavy, guilt-tripping way that makes you feel like a monster for even considering saying no. So I agreed. But I had conditions. I told them I wanted to see all the paperwork, be involved in communications with the bank, and have regular updates until the mortgage was in their name. Kellen gave me a slick nod and said, "Of course, kiddo. You're doing us a favor. We won't leave you in the dark." The following months were quiet. They closed on a house across town, older, but charming. I didn't hear much, except the occasional update from Leona about how busy they were with renovations. I offered to help once or twice, but they always had an excuse. Something about contractors or needing to meet alone with their interior designer. Then, out of the blue, I received an invitation to their housewarming party. A physical invitation, gold-trimmed and all, like it was a gala. It felt excessive, but I told myself they were just excited. I RSVP'd yes. The day of the party, I pulled up to the house and immediately noticed two things. First, the place looked far more expensive than I expected. Second, all the parking out front was reserved. Literally. They had cones and a printed sign that read, "Guest parking at Parkside Church Lot, shuttle provided." It felt strange, but I parked and walked over. The house was full of people, neighbors, distant relatives, friends I hadn't seen in years. There was music playing, trays of catered food, and a man in a bow tie offering lemonade from a silver tray. I found Kellen holding court on the patio, gesturing with a drink in hand as he regaled a small crowd with stories of hustling through the lean years. Leona stood beside him, beaming, not speaking much. She looked radiant, but tired, or maybe just tense. Then Kellen saw me. He gave me a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes and said, loudly enough for several people to hear, well, look who decided to drop by. Better late than never, huh? Just in time to watch us kick the freeloaders out." He laughed, like it was a joke. Except no one else laughed. I blinked. "Find a new place to crash," he added, almost under his breath, before turning to talk to someone else. I stood there stunned. Did he just say that to me? In front of all these people? Before I could respond, Grandpa, who had been sitting quietly nearby with a plate of food, shook his head and muttered, "Some people just have no respect for the hand that feeds them." I looked at him, but he didn't look back. He was staring at the house, at Kellen, and then Aunt Rhea, who had come up beside me without me noticing, said something that made my blood run cold. "He's right," she said. "Better be careful what you wish for." I looked down at the keys in my purse. Keys I'd been given for emergencies, for trust, for the role I played in making this all happen. I didn't say anything. Not yet. I just gripped them a little tighter in my hand and started walking toward the door. I didn't leave right away. Part of me wanted to. The urge to turn around, get in my car, and drive straight home was strong. But a louder part of me, the part that had sat through years of quiet sacrifices, the part that had been guilt-tripped, used, and disrespected, told me to stay. Watch. Listen. See how far they'd really go. So I stayed. I walked inside with a calm, unreadable expression, weaving through the clusters of guests gathered in the open-plan kitchen and living area. The house was beautiful. That much I'll admit. Hardwood floors, freshly painted walls and soft creams and grays, polished countertops, staged lighting. I could still smell fresh varnish in the hallway. They'd done a lot of work and spent a lot of money doing it. And none of it sat right with me. They had told me they needed help to get started, that this was just a stepping stone, a modest home they could grow into. But what I was seeing wasn't modest. It was curated, over the top, like they were trying to prove something. And I had a growing suspicion they were trying to prove it at my expense. I spotted Leona near the fireplace, chatting with a woman I didn't recognize, probably one of Kellen's clients, or potential investors, or podcast co-hosts, or whatever he was claiming that week. I approached slowly. She saw me and smiled, but it was the kind of smile people use when they're performing, not connecting. "There you are," she said. "I've been looking for you." I raised an eyebrow. "Really? I didn't see you looking." She blinked, slightly caught off guard, then turned to the woman beside her. "Oh, Hazel, this is my cousin, the one I told you about." Hazel gave me a tight smile. "The one who co-signed?" Leona chuckled awkwardly. "Well, yeah, for now, just until we refinance." Hazel turned back to her and said, like I wasn't standing right there, "Smart. Honestly, that's how people get ahead these days. Use your network. Use your network." The phrase rang in my ears like an insult dressed as business advice. "I didn't realize I was a resource," I said evenly. Leona's smile faltered, but she brushed it off. "Come on, don't be like that. You said you were happy to help." "No," I said. "I said I'd help with conditions. And from what I can tell, those have already been ignored." She looked around, then took my elbow and gently steered me toward a hallway off the main living area. Once we were out of earshot, she dropped the cheerful tone. "What's going on with you today?" I stared at her. Really stared. "You let Kellen talk to me like I'm some drifter looking for a couch to crash on." She rolled her eyes. "He was joking. He said he was kicking the freeloaders out, Leona, in front of your guests." Leona crossed her arms. "He didn't mean you." "No," I asked. "Because your mom's no longer living here. Grandpa and Aunt Nora were sitting outside by themselves like unwanted leftovers, and everyone else is circling around Kellen like he's the king of the castle." She shifted uncomfortably. "Look, we've had to make some hard decisions lately. This is our house now. We need space, peace, privacy. You wouldn't understand." I let that sink in. She didn't mean it to sting, I think, but it did. I wouldn't understand, apparently. Even though I had helped them qualify. Even though I had held her while she cried about how overwhelmed she was with wedding debt. Even though I had opened my finances to help her again and again. "I understand more than you think," I said quietly. "And I think it's time we revisit the terms of our agreement." Her eyes narrowed just slightly. "What do you mean?" I didn't answer. I just walked past her and made my way back to the kitchen, where the party was still buzzing. I found Grandpa standing near the window, watching the backyard where kids were chasing bubbles and someone's golden retriever had made itself at home on a lawn chair. He didn't say anything when I came up beside him. He just handed me a napkin-wrapped plate of food and muttered, "You're being pushed out." I nodded. "I know. They've been planning this," he added. "Rhea told me last week." Said Kellen started making comments about how she needed to stop treating the house like a community center. "She gave them part of the down payment," I said. "She did. And they still asked me to co-sign." He looked at me, finally. That's the kind of people they've become. I didn't answer. I just stared at the kids outside, wondering how long the illusion could hold. How long Kellen could bluff his way through dinners and parties and social media before it all came crashing down. Later, after most of the guests had eaten and the evening light had softened, Kellen stood on the patio steps to make a speech. He tapped his glass with a spoon like he was hosting a formal banquet. Everyone quieted, gathering around. Leona stood at his side, smiling, hands folded in front of her like she was in a wedding photo. "We just want to thank everyone for coming today," Kellen began. "It's been a long road to get here, but we finally have a place to call our own. No more sleeping on couches, no more living in basements or relying on borrowed time." He laughed. A few people chuckled. Leona looked down. "And to those of you who helped along the way, we appreciate you," he said. "But it's time for us to live our lives now, build our future. And sometimes that means making hard choices, even if some people don't understand." There was a strange silence after that. Grandpa shook his head. Aunt Rhea stood up from her lawn chair and walked inside without a word. And I pulled out the keys from my purse, the ones they gave me just in case, as a gesture of trust. I walked up to the patio and placed them on the nearby table, gently but deliberately. A few heads turned. Kellen paused mid-sip of his drink. Leona took a half-step forward. "All right," I said. My voice was calm, steady, unshaken. "Guess you don't need me to co-sign for this mortgage anymore. Hope the banks aren't too picky." No one spoke. I turned and walked to the front of the house, where my car was parked down the street, just past the shuttle van. I didn't drive off right away. I sat there for a few minutes, hands on the steering wheel, watching as the last rays of sunlight reflected off the windows of their house, paid for by other people's sacrifices, decorated with borrowed pride. I didn't sleep that night. It wasn't anger keeping me awake, not entirely. It was clarity. For the first time in years, I saw everything for what it really was. All the favors that were never returned. The help that came with invisible strings. The way Leona and Kellen had taken not just my signature, but my trust, and twisted it into leverage for their social climb. I thought about that speech on the patio. About the look on Aunt Rhea's face when she quietly disappeared inside. About Grandpa's muttered warning. And about the smug little smile Kellen wore like it was part of his wardrobe. I wasn't going to blow up their lives in some theatrical display. That's not who I am. I'm not confrontational. I don't like scenes. But I'm thorough. And I work in finance. That's what they underestimated. Kellen, with all his flashy talk and buzzwords, didn't realize that behind my quiet desk job was a knowledge of things he barely understood. He thought co-signing a loan meant I'd help them get approved and disappear into the background. He was wrong. The next morning, I pulled out everything I had on their mortgage. I'd kept copies of every signed document, email threads with their agent, and a digital trail of every step of the process. That had been one of my conditions, remember? Full access to communications until the mortgage was refinanced. They hadn't refinanced. They couldn't, not yet. And that meant, legally, I was still on the hook. But it also meant I still had rights. I hadn't signed away my protection. In fact, I had made sure my name appeared on everything, not just as a guarantor, but as a party of record. Their house was ours, not just theirs. And if they were going to act like I didn't matter, then I was going to show them exactly how much I did. I started with a call to the mortgage broker, a quiet, polite conversation just to confirm that everything was still in place. It was. Payments were being made on time, but just barely. The mortgage was tight, and from what the broker mentioned offhandedly, there had been 2 close calls in the first 3 months. That told me everything I needed to know. They were overextended. I waited a few days. Let the dust from the housewarming settle. Let them believe I was gone for good, that I'd walked away wounded. I even ignored a message from Leona, just a short, vague text asking, "Hey, can we talk soon?" I didn't respond. Then I went to visit Aunt Rhea. She had moved into a small, quiet apartment near the edge of town. I brought tea and shortbread cookies, the kind she used to give us when we were kids. When she opened the door, her eyes widened in surprise. "I didn't expect to see you," she said softly. "I figured you could use a break from pretending everything's fine," I replied. She stepped aside to let me in. The apartment was modest. Clean. Not sad. Exactly. But smaller than what she deserved after everything she'd given. She still had the same armchair from my childhood, worn at the corners, with an Afghan blanket folded neatly across the back. "I shouldn't have said what I did at the party," she said after a few minutes. "About being careful what you wish for." "You were right," I said. "Just not in the way you meant." She looked at me. I sat across from her and laid out the documents. Loan terms, payment history, our co-signed agreement. I showed her everything. I explained what I could still legally do as a co-signer and how deeply involved I still was. I also told her what I wasn't going to do. Not yet. "I'm not pulling the rug out from under them," I said. "Not unless I have to. But I'm not going to be treated like an afterthought, either. And I want you to know, I'm not doing this out of pettiness." She was quiet for a long time. Then, gently, she said, "They've changed. I don't know when exactly, but somewhere along the line, Leona started acting like the world owed her something. And Kellen? He just fed that belief." I nodded. "They don't see people. They see utility." I stood to leave after a while. Before I left, she reached into a small drawer and handed me an envelope. "They gave me this when I moved out. Said it was all they could offer right now." Inside were two $20 bills and a grocery store gift card with less than $5 on it. That was it. That was what they gave her after she handed over part of her retirement to help them buy their dream home. It solidified my decision. I waited another week. Let my silence stretch. Then I sent Leona an email. Not a text. Not a call. An email with a subject line that read, "Mortgage cosign agreement. Follow up." It was formal, precise, and intentionally cold. I reminded her that I was still a legal cosigner, that I had full access to the account, and that I would now be requesting monthly updates on all financial activity related to the house. I also let her know that I would be scheduling a meeting with the mortgage broker to discuss a timeline for refinancing, and that until that was resolved, I expected full transparency. I sent it at 8 a.m. By 8:17, my phone rang. I didn't answer. By noon, I had 3 missed calls and a flurry of texts, each more anxious than the last. "Leona, hey, what is this? I thought we were good." "Leona, can we talk? This email makes it sound like you're mad." "Kellen, this isn't how family handles things. We're doing our best." "Leona, please call me. I'm really confused right now." Confused. Not sorry. Not apologetic. Just confused that I wasn't playing along anymore. I didn't respond. I wanted them to sit with the shift. 2 days later, I scheduled a meeting with the broker and made it clear that I was no longer comfortable with the arrangement as it stood. I wasn't pulling out yet, but I was preparing options. I requested a full review of the account, including payment history, debt-to-income ratio updates, and a current appraisal request. The broker, awkward but polite, obliged. That request triggered a small internal review, which led to something I had suspected. Leona and Kellen had quietly taken out a personal loan against their home's equity. A small one, but still one that had not been disclosed to me. Something that, legally, they were required to do. It was exactly what I needed. A crack in the foundation. A legal misstep. I filed the first formal letter of concern through my own legal contact. Just a simple letter outlining my discovery and a reminder that failure to notify a cosigner of additional liens or financial agreements was a breach of contract. It wasn't a lawsuit, but it was the first nudge. By the time Kellen and Leona received the formal letter from my attorney, their silence had turned from smug indifference to panicked urgency. They stopped trying to call. No more friendly messages. No more vague explanations. Just a sudden flood of emails from Kellen, written in stiff, overly formal language that read like he had copied them from an online template. He called my actions unexpected, unwarranted, and even harmful to our long-standing family unity. I didn't reply. Instead, I let the process unfold. As co-signer, I had the legal right to demand transparency and initiate a review if there was financial misconduct. The hidden personal loan they'd taken out, without informing me, was a violation of our agreement. Even though the amount wasn't massive, it was enough to trigger an official inquiry with the lender. When the lender reviewed the documents and saw that the second loan hadn't been disclosed to me, they flagged it. Quietly, but firmly. This prompted a reassessment of their mortgage status. Now, here's the thing about banks and risk. Once something doesn't add up, the entire file gets reevaluated. They looked at Kellen's fluctuating income, which was inconsistent and largely unverifiable. They reviewed Leona's employment record, which, it turned out, had also recently changed. She had left her job at the logistics company a few months prior to join Kellen's consulting vision full-time, whatever that meant. In short, they didn't meet the requirements anymore, not without me. A letter went out from the lender, informing them that due to a breach of the mortgage cosigner agreement and newly uncovered financial instability, they would have 60 days to either refinance the loan without me or the mortgage would be called into default. Kellen tried to spin it. He reached out to my father, to Aunt Nora, even to Grandpa, trying to drum up sympathy. He said I was sabotaging their fresh start and lashing out because of a misunderstanding. He even hinted that I was too emotionally reactive for business matters. But here's the thing. Once you push away every decent person around you, there's no one left to advocate for you. Grandpa called me, just once, to ask if I was sure about what I was doing. I told him yes. I explained everything. The way I was treated, the lies, the breach of trust. There was a pause on the line. Then he said, "All right, then they'll have to face the consequences. Maybe that's the only way they'll learn." And that was the last we spoke about it. Over the next several weeks, Kellen and Leona scrambled. They tried to secure a new co-signer. They tried to restructure the loan. They even tried to sell the house quickly, but the market wasn't kind, especially not with a flagged mortgage and an inspection due. The appraisal had revealed some rushed renovation work that hadn't passed code, and that, too, became a hurdle. Eventually, the notice went out. Foreclosure proceedings were beginning. Not because I wanted to destroy them, but because they left me no other option. The lender had warned them. I had given them weeks to correct it. But instead of admitting fault, they doubled down on their pride. The final blow came quietly. One morning, I received a certified letter from the bank informing me that the house had been repossessed and would be listed at auction. Since I was a co-signer, I'd been absolved of liability thanks to my early documentation and the legal filings I'd submitted. I wasn't held responsible for any loss. They were. I drove past the house once, just to see. It was empty. The yard, once meticulously kept, had overgrown grass. The for sale sign had been posted, not by a proud couple announcing their success, but by the bank reclaiming what wasn't theirs to begin with. I didn't feel joy. Not exactly. But I did feel peace. I later heard, through extended family, that Kellen and Leona had moved into a small rental apartment outside the city. She had returned to part-time administrative work. He was trying to rebuild his consulting brand, though no one seemed to know what that actually meant. They didn't apologize. They didn't reach out again. I think their pride was too big, even after everything. Or maybe they really believed they'd been wronged. But I knew the truth. Aunt Rhea eventually came to visit me, holding a box of old family photos. She told me she was sorry for the pressure she put on me, for how she ignored the signs. She didn't ask me to forgive them. I think they need to live with it, she said. Just like I lived with the choices I made. I offered her tea, and we sat in quiet understanding. As for me, I used the experience to set better boundaries. I bought my own place a few months later. A quiet townhouse on the edge of town. Nothing extravagant. Just mine. No shared mortgages. No hidden expectations. No speeches on patios about freeloaders. Just peace. And the knowledge that sometimes, the best revenge doesn't come from rage or destruction, but from calmly reclaiming what was always yours, while the people who tried to use you watch it all slip through their fingers. They thought I was a resource. They forgot I was also the lock on the door. And now, they're the ones standing outside, looking in. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments. If you like this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this.
Here's a question for you. What do you do when your stepmom tries to act like your mom and you've had enough? In today's story, a girl decides to put her foot down and tell her stepmom exactly where she stands. But things quickly spiral out of control, and now she's wondering if she made a huge mistake. Stay tuned to see how this one plays out, and make sure to subscribe for more jaw-dropping stories.
I, 17F, have lived with my dad and stepmom Lisa for the past 5 years. My mom passed away when I was 12, and while Lisa and my dad got together pretty quickly afterward, I never really saw her as my mom. I was polite, but I never called her mom. Never felt that connection, and honestly, I never asked for a second mother in the first place. Lisa, however, has always wanted that role. She pushes hard to be involved in my life, showing up at my school events, making me do family bonding activities, and even introducing herself to people as my mother. I tolerated it, but I kept my distance. The real issue started last week when I got invited to a close friend's birthday party. It wasn't some wild party, just a sleepover with a few friends. My dad was fine with it, but when Lisa overheard, she immediately shut it down. She said it wasn't appropriate for a young lady to be out all night, that I needed to respect house rules, and that she was putting her foot down. I laughed at first because who was she to make the rules? My dad didn't say anything, just gave me a look that told me he wasn't going to back me up. That's when Lisa got even more serious. She said that if I went to the party, I'd be grounded for a month. That's when I snapped. I told her, "You're not my mom. You don't get to ground me." She looked stunned, like I had just slapped her. My dad immediately jumped in, telling me I was disrespectful and needed to apologize. But I wasn't backing down. Lisa stormed off, and now my dad is saying I should apologize for hurting her feelings. Lisa has barely spoken to me since, and I overheard her crying in their room later that night. The next morning, I woke up to an eerily quiet house. No good mornings, no forced small talk, just silence. Lisa wasn't in the kitchen like usual, and my dad was avoiding eye contact with me. I grabbed some cereal and sat down, scrolling through my phone, when my dad finally spoke. "We need to talk?" I braced myself. "Here it comes." He sat across from me and sighed like I had personally aged him 10 years overnight. "Lisa's really hurt. She's been trying her best with you. And what you said, it cut deep." I rolled my eyes. "Dad, she tried to ground me. You were fine with me going. How does she get to make that decision?" "Because she's my wife." That sentence hit me harder than I expected. "And I'm your daughter. Shouldn't my feelings matter, too?" He looked uncomfortable but didn't say anything. Typical then. Lisa walked in. Her eyes were red and puffy like she had been crying all night. I felt a tiny pang of guilt, but only for a second. She sat down across from me, took a deep breath, and said, "I don't understand why you hate me so much." That threw me off. "I don't hate you," I said, but she shook her head. "You never let me in. No matter what I do, you push me away." I didn't know what to say to that. Because yeah, I did keep her at arm's length. But was that wrong? Then she dropped the bomb. "I think it's time we set some ground rules. If you're going to live in this house, you need to respect me as a parent. Otherwise, maybe you should think about living somewhere else." Wait, what? My own stepmom was basically telling me to either treat her like a mother or leave. I turned to my dad, expecting him to shut this down. Instead, he just sighed. "Lisa, maybe that's a bit much." "No, she needs to understand," Lisa snapped. "I'm tired of feeling like an outsider in my own home." At that moment, I realized something. This wasn't about me disrespecting her. This was about control. Lisa wanted to force a mother-daughter relationship, and I wasn't giving her what she wanted. And apparently, that was enough to make her want me out. But if she thought I was going to back down, she had another thing coming, so I made a decision right then and there. And things only got worse from there. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "So, let me get this straight. If I don't start pretending you're my mom, you want me to leave?" Lisa didn't answer right away, but her silence was enough. I turned to my dad, hoping, praying, he would stand up for me. But all he did was rub his temples like this was just some mild inconvenience instead of his wife trying to kick his daughter out. "Nobody is kicking you out," he mumbled, but he didn't sound convinced. Lisa crossed her arms. "I just don't see why we should all live under the same roof if you refuse to be a family." I almost laughed. "A family? Lisa, you're trying to punish me for not seeing you as my mother, but you never were my mother. You married my dad. That's it." Her face turned red. "I have done everything for you. I cook, I clean, so does a maid, but I don't call her mom either." Okay, that was harsh. But I was past the point of caring. Lisa gasped, looking at my dad for backup. He just sat there, staring at the table. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever. Finally, Lisa stood up, shaking her head. "Fine. If you don't want me in your life, then I'm done trying." She stormed out of the kitchen, leaving my dad and me sitting in awkward silence. I stared at him, waiting for him to say something. But he just sighed again. "You really shouldn't have said that," he muttered. I felt a lump form in my throat. "That's all you have to say?" He hesitated. "Lisa loves you, you know. She just wants to be part of your life." I shook my head, pushing my chair back. "No, Dad. She wants to control my life. There's a difference." And with that, I walked away, leaving him alone in the kitchen. Lisa barely spoke to me for the next few days. My dad acted like nothing had happened. I still went to the sleepover, but it didn't feel as fun as I thought it would. A week later, Lisa and my dad sat me down again. This time, my dad did most of the talking. He said they both wanted to work on our relationship, but that I needed to put in effort, too. I agreed. But only if Lisa stopped trying to parent me. She could be my dad's wife, a person in my life, but she wasn't my mother, and she never would be. Lisa didn't like that answer, but she reluctantly agreed. That's where things stood. Until I found out something that changed everything. A few days after our argument, I overheard Lisa on the phone. I wasn't eavesdropping on purpose, but she was in the living room, talking loud enough for the whole house to hear. "I don't know what else to do, Mom. She refuses to accept me. I've tried everything, and Dan just lets her walk all over me. Maybe I should just leave." Wait, leave? I felt my stomach drop. Was she really considering leaving my dad over this? I stepped closer, my heart pounding, and heard her mom's voice on the other end. "Sweetheart, you knew what you were signing up for. Teenagers are difficult. But if you feel that unappreciated, maybe it's time to put yourself first." Lisa let out a shaky breath. "I don't know. I love Dan, but I can't keep living in a house where I feel like an outsider." At that moment, something shifted in me. Had I wanted Lisa to leave? Maybe. But hearing her say it out loud, it felt different. I didn't like Lisa trying to control me, but I didn't want to be the reason my dad lost another wife either. And if she did leave, what would that mean for him? Would he blame me? I barely slept that night. The next morning, I found Lisa in the kitchen. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept much either. I hesitated before sitting across from her. "Hey." She looked surprised. "Hey." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, I took a deep breath. "I heard what you said last night. About maybe leaving." Her eyes widened. "You were listening?" "I didn't mean to. But I guess I didn't realize how much this was affecting you." Lisa sighed. "I never wanted to replace your mom, you know? I just wanted to be someone in your life." I thought about that for a second. Maybe that was true. Maybe she really had just wanted a place in our family, and I had made that impossible. But still, that doesn't mean you get to control me. She nodded slowly. "I know." We sat there in silence. It wasn't exactly a truce, but it felt like the first time we actually understood each other. Lisa didn't end up leaving. Things between us are still weird, but they're different. She gives me space, and I don't push her away as much. We'll never have a real mother-daughter bond, but maybe, just maybe, we can figure out something in between. At first, I thought that was the end of it. Lisa stayed. Things were tense but manageable, and life moved on. But then, a few weeks later, I noticed something weird. Lisa started acting different. She wasn't just giving me space. She was avoiding me. At first, I thought maybe she was just being careful not to overstep. But then I started noticing little things. She'd leave the room when I walked in. If I asked her something, she'd keep her answers short and to the point, then immediately find a reason to walk away. She even stopped making dinner for me. I'd come home to find food in the fridge, but it was always just enough for my dad and Lisa. Like she forgot I lived there. I thought I was imagining things until one night, when my dad called me into the living room. Lisa sat next to him, arms crossed, looking everywhere but at me. "We need to talk," Dad said, his voice serious. I sat down, bracing myself. "About what?" Lisa let out a sharp breath. "About boundaries." I frowned. "What does that mean?" She finally looked at me, her expression unreadable. "I try to be part of your life. I really did. But it's clear you don't want me here, so I'm done trying. From now on, we keep things separate. You don't talk to me, I don't talk to you. I'm not cooking for you. I'm not helping you with anything, and I'm done pretending we're some kind of family." I blinked, completely thrown off. "Wait, what?" Dad cleared his throat. "Lisa and I talked, and we think this is what's best. You and Lisa will be like roommates. Civil, but not involved in each other's lives." I stared at them, my mind racing. "So you're telling me that because I didn't want Lisa acting like my mom, she's just going to pretend I don't exist?" Lisa shrugged. "That's what you wanted, right?" I opened my mouth, then closed it. Wasn't this what I had been fighting for all along? For Lisa to stop acting like she had control over me? Then why did it feel so off? It wasn't like she was being passive-aggressive. She wasn't rolling her eyes at me or making snarky comments. She had actually stopped caring. And, for some reason, that unsettled me more than anything else. Did I make a mistake? At first, I told myself this was fine. This was what I wanted, right? No more fake parenting, no more Lisa acting like she had authority over me. But as the days passed, Something started to feel off. Lisa really stuck to her word. She didn't just stop trying to parent me. She stopped acknowledging me completely. If I walked into a room, she'd leave. If I asked her a question, she'd answer in the shortest way possible and then turn away. It was like living with a stranger. At first, I convinced myself I didn't care. But then little things started piling up. One night, I came home late from studying at a friend's house. My dad was already asleep, but Lisa was still up, watching TV. Normally, she would have asked if I had eaten. This time, nothing. She didn't even look at me. I checked the fridge, expecting leftovers like always. But there was nothing. That's when I realized. She wasn't just avoiding me. She was cutting me out completely. The next day, I tested it. I left my laundry in the basket like I usually did, and for the first time ever, it stayed there, untouched. When I asked my dad about dinner plans, he casually said, "Oh, Lisa and I already ate." It wasn't just that Lisa was avoiding me. She was erasing me from her life. At first, I was annoyed. Then, I was angry. But finally, I just felt weirdly alone. One night, I finally broke. Lisa was in the kitchen, making tea, and I just blurted it out. "Why are you doing this?" She barely glanced at me. "Doing what?" "This. Pretending I don't exist." She set her mug down and sighed. "I'm not pretending. I'm just respecting the boundaries you wanted." I clenched my jaw. "I never said I wanted you to act like I wasn't here." "No," she said quietly, "but you made it very clear you don't want me as part of your life. So I'm not." And for the first time, I realized maybe I hadn't just set boundaries. Maybe I had pushed her out completely. The thing is, I don't even know how to fix it now. For the next few days, I kept thinking about what Lisa said. I had been so focused on making sure she wasn't trying to be my mom that I hadn't thought about what that would actually mean. Now, she wasn't just stepping back. She was gone. I started noticing how quiet the house felt. No more reminders to eat breakfast before school. No more little "drive safe" comments when I left the house. No more asking if I wanted something when she and my dad ordered food. It was like I was just there. And weirdly enough, my dad didn't seem to care. He still acted like everything was normal. One night, I finally tried talking to him about it. "Dad, does it not bother you that Lisa and I don't talk anymore?" He sighed and rubbed his forehead. "You're the one who wanted space, kiddo." "Yeah, but," I hesitated. "It's different now. It's like she's completely ignoring me." He shrugged. "She's just giving you what you wanted." That answer didn't sit right with me. I started paying more attention. And the more I did, the more I realized something else. Lisa wasn't just avoiding me. She was pulling back from everything. She stopped decorating the house with little seasonal things like she used to. She barely talked at dinner. When my dad tried to joke with her, she just gave him a small smile and went back to her phone. And then one night, I overheard something that made my stomach drop. I was coming downstairs for a snack when I heard Lisa talking to my dad in the kitchen. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," she said softly down my dad's side. "Lisa, it's just an adjustment period. It's been months, and she still hates me." "She doesn't hate you." Lisa let out a small laugh, but there was no humor in it. "Really? Because it feels like she does. And honestly, I'm starting to hate coming home. It doesn't feel like a home anymore." I froze. Was this my fault? Had I made things so unbearable that Lisa wanted to leave? And if she did, would my dad go with her? I had spent so much time fighting her role in my life that I hadn't realized how much things would change if she was gone. For the first time, I started wondering, did I even want that? That night, I barely slept. Lisa's words kept replaying in my head. "I'm starting to hate coming home." I had been so focused on pushing her away that I never stopped to think about what that actually meant. And now, she was miserable. And worse, she was thinking about leaving, that I needed to do something. But what? Apologizing felt weird. I wasn't even sure what I was apologizing for. I still didn't want a second mom. I still felt like she overstepped when she first moved in. But I also didn't want her to leave. The next morning, I decided to test the waters. I walked into the kitchen while she was making coffee and hesitated before speaking. "Morning." Lisa looked up, clearly surprised. "Morning." It was awkward, but I didn't let that stop me. I sat down at the table and casually asked, "Did you sleep okay?" She raised an eyebrow. like she wasn't sure if this was some kind of trick. Yeah. You? Yeah. I picked at my nails. So, I was thinking of ordering pizza later. Do you want anything? Lisa blinked. For the first time in months, she actually looked at me. You're asking if I want pizza? I shrugged. I mean, yeah. If you don't want any, that's fine. She was silent for a second. Then, she smiled, just barely. I like pepperoni. It was small, but it was something. Over the next few weeks, I started making little efforts, asking about her day, saying goodnight before heading to my room, offering to grab something for her when I went to the store. She didn't push me. She didn't act like we were suddenly best friends, but she met me halfway. And for the first time since she married my dad, things felt okay. I still don't think of Lisa as my mom, but maybe that's not the point. Maybe we don't have to force some perfect stepmother-stepdaughter bond. Maybe it's enough to just get along.
So, what do you think? Is she the a-hole? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel.
I still remember the exact tone my dad used when he said, "Anthony, don't lie to us. We already know it was you." It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry in the way people expect anger to sound. It was worse than that. It was calm, settled, like the verdict had already been reached and this conversation was just a formality. I was 15 years old, standing barefoot on the cold kitchen tile, wearing a hoodie that smelled faintly like laundry detergent, trying to understand how my life had just flipped upside down in less than 10 minutes. 1 minute I was finishing homework at the table, the next I was being told I was a thief. And the part that still messes with my head years later is this. The only evidence was my older brother pointing at me and saying, "It was him. My name is Anthony." I was 15 when this happened. I'm in my late 20s now, and I've replayed that day in my head more times than I'd like to admit. Not because I'm obsessed with the past, but because that moment quietly shaped everything that came after it. The way my parents looked at me, the way my brother learned he could get away with things, the way I learned, very early on, that in my family, truth mattered less than convenience. Growing up, my family looked normal from the outside. Suburban house, 2 parents who stayed married, 2 kids, dinner at the table most nights. If you drove past our place, you'd probably think we were boring in the best possible way. But inside that house, there was a very clear hierarchy, and I was never confused about where I stood. My brother, Mark, was 3 years older than me. He was louder, more confident, better at sports, better at talking to adults. Teachers liked him. Coaches liked him. My parents liked him in that special way they reserved just for him. The way that came with extra patience, extra chances, and endless benefit of the doubt. I was the quiet one. The kid who followed rules, who didn't get into trouble, who kept his head down and tried not to cause problems. I didn't realize at the time that being the easy kid often just means you're the one who gets ignored. Or worse, the one who becomes convenient to blame. The money incident happened on a Tuesday. I remember that detail because Tuesdays were my mom's grocery day, which meant she always had cash in her purse. Not a lot, but enough. That morning, she realized some of it was missing. $40, to be exact. Not hundreds. Not something catastrophic. Just enough to cause tension. I was in my room when I heard her voice from the kitchen, sharp and confused. "That's strange," she said. "I know I had more than this." At first, it wasn't directed at anyone. Just a comment floating in the air. But comments like that never stay neutral for long. My dad asked if she was sure. She said yes. Mark wandered in, leaning against the counter, pretending to scroll on his phone. I came in last, already feeling that low-grade anxiety I always felt when something went wrong in the house, even if I hadn't done anything. My mom asked the question that started everything. "Did either of you take money from my purse?" I said no immediately. Mark didn't answer at first. He shrugged, then said, "Why would I do that?" There was a pause. A small one. The kind that shouldn't matter, but does. My mom looked at Mark, then at me. And then Mark laughed, this short, dismissive sound, and said, "I mean, it wasn't me. It was him." And he pointed. Right at me. I actually laughed too. Not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd. I thought he was joking. I said, "What?" "No." I expected my parents to shut it down immediately. To say something like, "Don't accuse your brother without proof," or, "That's not funny." But they didn't. My dad frowned. My mom crossed her arms. The room shifted. "Anthony," my mom said, "be honest. I remember my heart starting to pound. Not because I was guilty, but because I suddenly realized they weren't treating this like a joke. I said, again, I didn't take it. I even explained where I'd been all day. School. Home. Homework. Same routine as always. Mark stood there quietly, letting me talk myself into a corner, wearing this almost bored expression like he was watching a show he'd already seen. My dad asked Mark why he thought it was me. Mark shrugged again and said, "He's always in your room. He knows where you keep your stuff. And he's been asking for money lately." That last part wasn't even fully true. I'd asked once if I could get money for a school trip. That was it. But the way Mark framed it made it sound like a pattern. Like motive. I tried to defend myself, but every word felt weaker than the last. The more I talked, the more frustrated my parents looked. My mom said something that still echoes in my head. "You know, Mark doesn't lie about things like this." And just like that, it was over. The decision was made. I was grounded. No phone. No going out. Extra chores. And the worst part wasn't even the punishment. It was the look of disappointment on my parents' faces, like I'd shattered some fragile image they had of me. I kept thinking, if I just stay calm, if I just keep telling the truth, they'll realize this doesn't make sense. But days passed, then weeks, and nothing changed. Mark got his $40 back, by the way. Not officially. It just reappeared. My mom said she must have miscounted. No apology. No conversation. Just a quiet reset, as if the accusation had never happened. Except it had. For me, it never went away. After that, something shifted. Every time something went missing, I felt eyes on me. A charger, a shirt, a few coins from the counter. Even when no one said anything, I could feel the suspicion. Mark leaned into it. He'd make little comments. "Careful where you leave that." Or, "Anthony's been around here a lot." Always said lightly. Always with that same half smile. And my parents never shut it down. I started pulling away, spending more time in my room, keeping to myself. I became hyper-aware of where my hands were, what I touched, how I moved through the house. It's strange how quickly you can start policing yourself when you realize no one else is going to defend you. Months later, the bank statement came up during a family argument. Not about me. Not about the money. About something else entirely. My parents were arguing with Mark about his spending. He was 18 by then. Still living at home. Still not working. My dad was frustrated, talking about responsibility, about learning the value of money. My mom pulled out old statements to prove how much they'd been supporting him. I wasn't even part of the argument. I was sitting on the couch, half listening, trying to stay invisible like I always did. But then my mom said something that made my head snap up. "And what about these withdrawals?" she asked, tapping the paper. "These cash withdrawals from months ago?" Mark froze. Just for a second. But I saw it. She read out the date. A Tuesday. The same Tuesday the $40 went missing. The room went quiet. My dad leaned in, squinting at the paper. Mark started talking fast, too fast, about how he didn't remember, about how it must have been something else. My heart was pounding again, but this time for a different reason. Pieces were lining up in my head, slow and heavy, like puzzle pieces you didn't even realize you were missing. No one had said my name yet. No one had looked at me. But I knew. I knew this was the moment everything I'd buried started clawing its way back to the surface. I watched my parents' faces as they studied that statement, watched confusion give way to something sharper. Suspicion. Real suspicion. And for the first time in months, it wasn't aimed at me. That silence after my mom read the date off the bank statement was different from any silence I'd ever felt in that house. It wasn't just awkward. It was heavy, like the air itself had thickened. For a moment, nobody spoke. My dad leaned closer to the paper, my mom's fingers still resting on the line with the withdrawal, and Mark stood there with his hands shoved into his hoodie pockets, rocking slightly on his heels. He was smiling, but it wasn't the confident, careless smile he usually wore. It was tight. Forced. I should have said something. I know that now. I should have stood up and pointed out the obvious connection. The date. The missing money. The accusation that had turned my life upside down. But 15-year-old me had learned a very specific lesson over those months. Speaking up didn't help. It made things worse. So I stayed quiet, sitting on the couch, my hands folded together, nails digging into my palms, watching the moment stretch. My mom finally broke the silence. "Mark," she said slowly, "do you remember taking out cash that day?" He shrugged, the same way he always did. "I don't know. Probably. I take cash out all the time." That was the same day the money went missing from my purse, she said. Her voice wasn't accusatory yet, more confused than anything. Mark laughed, a little too loudly. So? That doesn't mean anything. My dad looked up. It kind of does, he said. You told us Anthony took it. I felt my stomach twist when my name came up. Mark glanced at me, just briefly, and there it was. That look. The one that said, "Watch this." I mean, Mark said, spreading his hands. I thought it was him. I didn't know for sure. The room shifted again. My mom frowned. You said you were sure. Mark rolled his eyes. Mom, it was months ago. Why are we even talking about this now? That should have been the moment everything cracked wide open. But it wasn't. Not yet. Because instead of pushing, instead of sitting with the discomfort and actually questioning what had happened, my parents did what they'd always done. They backed off. My mom sighed, folded the statement, and said, "Fine. This isn't important right now." And just like that, the truth slipped back under the surface. I remember sitting there afterward, feeling something cold settle in my chest. It wasn't relief. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It was the realization that even when evidence stared them in the face, my parents still chose the path that caused the least friction. And that path almost never involved holding Mark accountable. From that point on, things didn't just go back to normal. They got worse. Mark took it as confirmation that he was untouchable. The comments got bolder. If something broke, he'd glance at me and say, "Anthony probably messed with it." If my mom couldn't find something, he'd joke, "Better check his room." Always said with a grin, always framed as a joke. And every time, my parents would sigh or tell him to knock it off, but never seriously. Never with consequences. The damage was already done. The idea had been planted. I stopped inviting friends over. I didn't want anyone else to see how I was treated, or worse, to become part of it. I spent more time outside, walking around the neighborhood, sitting on park benches just to avoid being home. When I was home, I stayed in my room, door closed, music low, trying to be invisible. I felt like a guest in my own house, one wrong move away from being accused of something else. The breaking point didn't come all at once. It came in layers. First, it was my phone. One afternoon, my dad called me into the living room. He was holding it in his hand. "We need to talk," he said. That phrase alone made my heart drop. He said Mark had told him I'd been acting secretive, that I'd been hiding things. So they'd gone through my phone while I was in the shower. They said they were just being cautious. I felt exposed, violated. There was nothing incriminating on my phone because I wasn't doing anything wrong, but that didn't matter. The message was clear. My privacy was a privilege, not a right. And it could be taken away at any time, based on nothing more than my brother's word. Then it was my room. My mom started cleaning it while I was at school. She said she was helping. I knew she was looking for something. Proof. Evidence. Anything that would justify the suspicion she couldn't quite let go of. Every time I came home and saw something moved, something touched, I felt a little more hollow. Mark, meanwhile, was living his best life. He stayed out late. He skipped chores. He borrowed money and never paid it back. When my parents confronted him, he'd get defensive, say they were nagging him, accuse them of treating him like a child. Somehow, that always turned into them apologizing to him. I watched it happen over and over again, like a script everyone knew by heart. The shocking betrayal came on a Sunday afternoon. My grandparents were coming over. That alone made everyone tense. My mom cared deeply about appearances, and my grandparents were big on family values, respect, and reputation. Before they arrived, my parents called Mark and me into the kitchen. My dad cleared his throat and said, "We need to set some boundaries for today." I didn't know what that meant until he looked directly at me. "We don't want any misunderstandings," he said carefully. "So it's best if you keep to yourself. Stay polite. Don't cause issues." I stared at him. "What issues?" My mom jumped in. "We just mean, you know how things have been. We don't want to bring up old stuff." Old stuff. That's what my character assassination had been reduced to. Then Mark spoke. "Yeah, Anthony, just don't be weird today, okay?" Something snapped inside me. I said, quietly but clearly, "I didn't do anything wrong." The room went silent. My mom's expression hardened. "This isn't the time," she said. "Why do you always do this?" "Always do what? Defend myself?" I wanted to scream. Instead, I nodded. I swallowed everything I wanted to say and nodded. When my grandparents arrived, things started fine. Polite conversation. Coffee. Small talk. I sat on the edge of the room, answering questions when asked, trying not to draw attention to myself. Mark was loud, charming, telling stories, making everyone laugh. At one point, my grandma commented on how responsible he was becoming. I felt my jaw tighten. Then my grandpa asked a simple question. "So, Anthony, how's school going?" Before I could answer, Mark laughed. "Depends who you ask." Everyone looked at him. My mom shot him a warning look, but it was weak. "What's that supposed to mean?" my grandpa asked. Mark shrugged. "Nothing. Just joking." But the damage was done. The room was tense again. And then, without warning, my dad said, "We had a little issue a while back. Nothing major." My heart dropped. My mom nodded. "Just some missing money. All sorted now." My grandma frowned. "Missing money?" Mark looked at me. And then he did it. He leaned forward and said, casually, "Anthony took it. He was punished." End of story. I felt like I'd been slapped. I stood up so fast my chair scraped loudly against the floor. "That's not true," I said. My voice was shaking, but I didn't care. "You know that's not true." My mom stood too. "Anthony, sit down." "No," I said. "I'm not doing this again." Mark smirked. "See? Defensive. That's how he always gets." My dad raised his voice. "Enough. We're not discussing this in front of guests." My grandpa looked confused. My grandma looked uncomfortable. And I realized, in that moment, that my parents were willing to let me be humiliated, branded, and talked about like a problem child, as long as it kept the peace with everyone else. That was the betrayal. Not just Mark lying again, but my parents letting him. Choosing silence. Choosing comfort over truth. Choosing him over me. I grabbed my jacket and walked out the front door without another word. No one stopped me. As I walked down the street, my hands shaking, my chest tight, one thought kept looping in my head. If they're willing to do this in front of everyone, what else are they willing to believe about me? That was the moment everything changed. Not because the truth came out, but because I finally understood something I'd been avoiding for months. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was who they were choosing to be. I didn't go far that night. I walked until the houses started to blur together, until the anger burned itself into something quieter and heavier. Eventually, I ended up sitting on the curb a few streets away, knees pulled to my chest, staring at nothing. I remember thinking, very clearly, that I didn't know where I belonged anymore. Going back home felt impossible, but there wasn't anywhere else to go. I was 15, no car, no money, no backup plan. Just this sinking realization that the place that was supposed to protect me had quietly decided I was expendable. When I finally went back, it was late. The house was dark. Everyone was asleep. No one had called. No one had texted. That hurt more than I expected. I went straight to my room and closed the door as softly as I could, like I was afraid of reminding the house I still existed. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything. The way Mark said it so casually. The way my parents didn't stop him. The way my grandparents looked at me, confused and uncomfortable, like they didn't quite know what to believe. I felt smaller than I ever had. The weeks that followed were some of the worst of my life. School became a blur. My grades slipped. Not because I wasn't capable, but because I couldn't focus. My mind was constantly racing, half expecting the next accusation, the next sideways comment. I stopped raising my hand in class. Stopped talking to friends about anything real. I didn't want to explain. I didn't want pity. I especially didn't want someone telling me to just talk to my parents, as if I hadn't tried that 100 times already. At home, the tension was constant. My parents acted like nothing had happened. They were polite, civil, but distant. Conversations with me were short and practical. "Did you do your homework? Dinner's ready. Don't forget to take out the trash." No warmth. No curiosity. No acknowledgement of what they'd let happen. Mark, on the other hand, seemed energized. Like he'd won something. He'd hum to himself, lounge around, make comments just loud enough for me to hear. He even started bringing friends over more often, parading his life through the house while I stayed hidden in my room. One night, I overheard him on the phone, laughing. "Nah, they'll believe whatever I say," he said. I froze on the stairs, my heart pounding. He kept talking, oblivious. "Anthony, please. He's the family screw-up. Always has been." Something inside me broke then. Not loudly. Not all at once. It was more like a quiet fracture, the kind that doesn't bleed but never heals quite right. I stopped trying to clear my name. That sounds backwards, but it was survival. Every attempt I'd made to defend myself had only made things worse. So I withdrew. I became exactly what they already thought I was: distant, quiet, detached. I did my chores. I followed rules. I said as little as possible. On the surface, I was the easy kid again. Inside, I was done. Rock bottom came a few months later, in a way I didn't expect. I found out my parents had been taking money from the small savings account my grandparents had helped me open years earlier. It wasn't a lot. Birthday money, holiday cash, little bits I'd saved over time. I noticed because the balance was lower than it should have been when I checked it at the bank for a school project. When I asked my mom about it, she didn't deny it. We needed it, she said. Mark had expenses. I remember standing there, stunned. That was my money. She sighed, like I was being difficult. You weren't using it. I wanted to scream. Instead, I nodded and walked away. That was the moment I truly understood that fairness didn't exist in that house. There was no invisible scale balancing things out. There was just Mark, and then there was me. I cried that night, quietly, into my pillow, so no one would hear. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was exhausted. It was the kind of crying that comes when you finally stop hoping things will get better on their own. And then, slowly, something shifted. It didn't happen because my parents apologized. They didn't. It didn't happen because Mark got exposed. He didn't. It happened because I realized something important. If no one in that house was going to protect me, I was going to have to do it myself. The first step was small. I got a job. It was part-time, after school, at a grocery store a few bus stops away. Stocking shelves. Nothing glamorous. But it was mine. My own money. My own hours. My own proof that I could exist outside the narrative my family had written for me. I didn't tell my parents at first. I just started working, coming home tired but strangely lighter. With that first paycheck, I did something symbolic. I opened a new bank account, one my parents didn't have access to. Standing there at the counter, signing the papers, I felt a sense of control I hadn't felt in months. It wasn't about the money. It was about ownership. I started saving. Quietly. Carefully. Every dollar felt like a small act of rebellion. At work, something unexpected happened. People trusted me. My manager complimented my reliability. Coworkers joked with me, asked me questions, treated me like a normal person. Not a suspect. Not a problem. Just Anthony. That alone was healing in a way I hadn't anticipated. I also found refuge at the library. After work or school, I'd go there instead of home. I read everything I could get my hands on. Not just for school, but for myself. Books about psychology. About finance. About people who'd built something out of nothing. I didn't have a grand plan yet, but I was laying groundwork without even realizing it. Mark noticed the change before my parents did. You think you're better than us now? He asked one night, when I came home late from work. I shrugged. I'm just busy. He scoffed. Don't forget where you came from. I looked at him and thought, I won't. My parents eventually found out about the job. They didn't stop me. They didn't encourage me either. My mom made a comment about how it was good for me to learn responsibility. I almost laughed at the irony. The real rise didn't come all at once. It was quiet. Invisible to everyone but me. Better grades. More confidence at work. A sense of identity that wasn't tied to my family's opinion of me. I started thinking about the future. About leaving. About building a life where no one could rewrite my character with a single accusation. But even as I grew stronger, the past didn't disappear. The lies still hung in the air, unspoken but present. The missing money. The bank statement. The truth that had almost surfaced and then been buried again. I hadn't forgotten it. I was storing it. Filing it away. Because deep down, I knew something else too. Truth has a way of resurfacing. And when it did, I intended to be ready. That preparation, that quiet rebuilding, was happening right under their noses. And they had no idea how close they were to losing control of the story they'd told about me. That realization didn't bring me peace. It brought me patience. By the time I turned 17, I had learned how to live two lives under the same roof. On the surface, I was compliant, quiet, polite. I went to school, went to work, came home, did my chores, stayed out of the way. I didn't argue. I didn't bring up the past. I didn't correct anyone when they made comments about that phase or joked about me being the sneaky one. I let the narrative stand because I understood something I hadn't before. Confronting people who benefit from a lie rarely makes them abandon it. It just makes them defend it harder. Underneath that surface, though, something very different was happening. I was paying attention. I noticed patterns. Small things at first. The way Mark talked when he thought no one was listening. The way my parents avoided certain topics but reacted strongly to others. The way money moved through the house without much oversight, always justified by urgency or convenience. I noticed how often my name still came up in conversations I wasn't part of. How easily my parents accepted Mark's version of events without checking details. And I noticed something else too. Mark was getting careless. He wasn't subtle anymore. He bragged about things he shouldn't have. He complained loudly about being broke while flashing new clothes and gadgets. He borrowed money from my parents constantly, always with a story attached. Sometimes it was school. Sometimes it was friends. Sometimes it was vague emergencies that never quite added up. My parents grumbled, but paid anyway. They always did. What they didn't realize was that I was keeping mental notes. The setup didn't start as revenge. Not consciously. It started as self-preservation. I wanted insurance. Proof. Something solid I could hold on to in case I ever needed to defend myself again. Because I had learned the hard way that truth without evidence meant nothing in that house. So I started collecting details. Dates. Amounts. Conversations. I didn't write anything down at first. I memorized. Mark withdrew cash almost every Friday. Usually small amounts, but consistent. He complained about not having money on Tuesdays, right before my mom went grocery shopping. My dad's wallet was often left unattended on the kitchen counter. Mark knew exactly when my parents got paid. He knew when they were distracted. He knew when they were tired. One evening, while I was cleaning the living room, Mark tossed his jacket onto the couch and went upstairs. I picked it up to fold it, something my mom had asked me to do, and felt something stiff in the pocket. I froze. For a split second, instinct told me to put it back and walk away. Old habits. Fear. Conditioning. Instead, I reached into the pocket. It was a folded receipt. ATM withdrawal. The date jumped out at me immediately. It was from months earlier. Not just any month. The same month the money went missing from my mom's purse. My hands were shaking as I unfolded it further. The amount matched. Exactly. I stared at that piece of paper like it might vanish if I blinked. This was it. This was what I'd been denied for so long. Proof. Actual, physical proof. Not feelings. Not arguments. Not memories. A fact. I folded it back up and slid it into my pocket. That was the moment the setup truly began. I didn't confront him. I didn't show my parents. I didn't even react outwardly. I waited. I knew better now than to rush. One receipt wasn't enough. It could be dismissed. Explained away. Lost in excuses. I needed context. A pattern. A story that couldn't be waved off as coincidence. So I started documenting quietly. I bought a cheap notebook and kept it hidden in my backpack, not at home. I wrote down dates and times. Things I overheard. Moments that felt small but fit into a bigger picture. I took photos of receipts when I found them. I memorized bank app screens when Mark carelessly left his phone unlocked near me, not touching anything, just observing. I didn't cross lines that would get me caught. I stayed patient. At the same time, I started building allies, though I didn't think of them that way at first. My grandparents were the first. After that Sunday incident, they'd called a few times to check in on me. At first, the conversations were surface level. School, work, weather. But slowly, carefully, I let pieces slip. Not accusations, just experiences. How isolated I felt. How hard it had been. How confused I was about what had happened back then. I didn't say Mark stole the money. I let them come to their own conclusions. My grandma listened more than she spoke. My grandpa asked questions. Calm ones. Specific ones. The kind that made me feel seen instead of interrogated. I realized something important during those calls. They weren't blind. They'd just been kept at a distance. Then there was my manager at work. I didn't tell her my life story, but she noticed my drive. My consistency. She trusted me with more responsibility. Extra shifts. Closing duties. Small leadership roles. She wrote me a recommendation without me even asking. For the first time, an adult authority figure believed in me without suspicion attached. That mattered more than she probably realized. As my 18th birthday approached, the tension at home intensified. Mark was spiraling in his own way. He'd failed a class, lost a job, burned through money faster than ever. My parents argued about him constantly, though never in front of him. When they did talk to him, it was gentle, careful, like they were afraid he'd break if they pushed too hard. One night, I overheard my dad say, "We just need to get him through this rough patch." I almost laughed. Mark's entire life was a rough patch, padded by their denial. Meanwhile, I was planning my exit. I applied for scholarships. Quietly. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't want their opinions. I filled out forms at the library. I stayed up late writing essays about perseverance, resilience, overcoming obstacles. I never mentioned my family directly, but every word was shaped by them, by what they'd put me through. And slowly, responses started coming back. Acceptance letters, small grants, opportunities. Each one felt like another brick in a foundation they didn't know I was laying. The real opportunity came unexpectedly. My grandparents decided to host a family gathering. Not a holiday, not a birthday, just a dinner. They said they missed everyone and wanted us all together. My parents were eager. Mark didn't care either way. I said yes without hesitation, because by then, I knew something they didn't. My grandma had asked me, gently, during one of our calls, "Anthony, are you sure about what happened back then?" And this time, I hadn't said, "I think so." I'd said yes. I told her I had proof. Not everything. Not yet. But enough. She didn't ask to see it. She didn't demand details. She just said, "All right," in a tone that told me she believed me. That dinner wasn't about food. It was about timing. In the weeks leading up to it, Mark grew more reckless. He borrowed money from my grandparents without telling my parents. He blamed me for something breaking in the garage. He even joked, loudly, about how easy it was to get away with things if you knew who people trusted. Every comment, every action, just added fuel. By the time the dinner date arrived, I had everything lined up. Receipts, notes, witnesses, patterns. I didn't plan to explode. I didn't want a dramatic confrontation. I wanted something far more effective. I wanted the truth to emerge slowly, undeniably, in a way that forced everyone to sit with it, to feel it, to own it. As we pulled into my grandparents' driveway that evening, I felt strangely calm. Mark walked ahead, confident as ever. My parents followed, already talking about dessert. I stepped out of the car last, adjusted my jacket, and thought to myself, this is the last time they see me as the person they think they know. Because once this started, there was no going back. And they had no idea what they were about to lose. Dinner started the way it always did at my grandparents' house. Polite. Predictable. The table set neatly, food laid out like it was meant to smooth over anything uncomfortable. My grandma moved around the kitchen with quiet purpose, my grandpa poured drinks, and my parents slipped easily into their familiar roles. Mark was loud, relaxed, confident. He laughed too much. He always did when he thought he was untouchable. I stayed quiet. Not because I was nervous, but because I didn't need to fill the space anymore. Halfway through dinner, my grandpa cleared his throat. The sound cut through the chatter in a way that made everyone pause. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look angry. He just said, "Before dessert, there's something I want to talk about." My mom smiled politely. "Is everything okay?" "Yes," he said. Then he looked directly at Mark. "That depends on how honest everyone wants to be." Mark chuckled. "What's this about?" My grandpa didn't answer him right away. Instead, he reached under the table and pulled out a thin folder. Not thick, not dramatic, just enough to matter. He placed it on the table and slid it toward the center. "I've been going over some old bank statements," he said calmly. "Mine, your parents, and some others." The room went still. My dad frowned. "Dad, what is this?" My grandpa opened the folder. He didn't rush. He laid things out one by one, like he was teaching a lesson. ATM withdrawal slips. Printed bank records. Dates highlighted neatly. He tapped one page with his finger. "This withdrawal happened on a Tuesday afternoon, several years ago. $40. Does that date sound familiar to anyone?" My mom's face drained of color. Mark shifted in his chair. "Why are we digging up old stuff?" "Because it was never resolved," my grandma said gently, her voice steady but firm. "And because Anthony showed me something I couldn't ignore." My parents turned to look at me. Really look at me. Not the way they usually did, through a lens of assumption, but with something closer to confusion. My grandpa continued. "That same day, money went missing from your mother's purse. Anthony was punished for it." My dad swallowed. "We thought he took it." "Yes," my grandpa said. "You thought that? Because Mark told you he did." Mark laughed, sharp and defensive. "This is ridiculous." My grandpa slid another paper forward. This receipt was found in Mark's jacket months later. Same date, same amount, same ATM. Silence. I watched my parents' faces as the pieces clicked together, slowly and painfully. My mom stared at the paper like it might rearrange itself if she looked long enough. My dad leaned back in his chair, hands pressed flat against the table. That's not all, my grandma said. There's a pattern. Repeated withdrawals. Always on days when you were distracted. Always small enough not to notice right away. Mark's smile vanished. So what? You think I stole from everyone? I think, my grandpa said evenly, that you lied about your brother. And you let him carry the consequences for years. Mark stood up, so fast his chair tipped backward. This is insane. You're all ganging up on me. No, my dad said quietly. That word landed harder than any shout. He was staring at Mark, his expression unreadable. We're finally listening. Mark turned to my mom. You know me. You know I wouldn't do that. She didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was barely above a whisper. You said you were sure it was Anthony. I was, Mark snapped. I mean, I thought I was. You didn't think, she said. You accused. The room felt like it was cracking open. Not violently, but completely. There was no yelling. No dramatic explosion. Just the slow collapse of a lie that had been propped up by convenience and favoritism. My dad pushed his chair back and stood. We punished him, he said, more to himself than anyone else. We took his phone. We grounded him. We watched him pull away and said nothing. My mom covered her mouth with her hand. Tears welled in her eyes, but they didn't soften what she'd done. They didn't undo years of silence. Mark looked around, realizing the ground beneath him was gone. So what now, he demanded. You all just believe him? My grandpa shook his head. This isn't about believing. This is about evidence. Mark laughed again, but it was hollow. He planned this. He's always been like this. I finally spoke. My voice was calm, steady. I didn't plan anything. I waited. Because I knew if I spoke too soon, you'd talk your way out of it. Again, my parents flinched. I didn't want revenge, I continued. I wanted the truth. I wanted my name back. My mom stood and walked over to me slowly, like she wasn't sure I'd stay put. Anthony, she said, tears spilling now, I'm so sorry. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I realized something important. Her apology wasn't nothing, but it wasn't everything either. I accept that you're sorry, I said. But that doesn't erase what happened. My dad nodded, his eyes wet. You're right. Mark scoffed. You're all overreacting. My grandpa turned to him, his voice firm for the first time that night. No, you are finally facing consequences. He told Mark that the money he'd borrowed from them was no longer a gift. It was a debt. That trust, once broken, wouldn't be handed back lightly. That help would now come with accountability. My parents told him he would be moving out within the month, that they would help him find a place, but not fund his lifestyle anymore. Not cover for him. Not clean up his messes. Mark looked stunned, angry, small. For the first time, he had nowhere to point the blame. The fallout didn't end that night. It rippled outward. My parents tried to repair things, awkwardly at first. Therapy was mentioned. Conversations happened that should have happened years earlier. Some days were better than others. But I didn't stay. A week later, I packed my things. Not in anger. Not in a rush. Just deliberately. I moved into a small place near campus, paid for with scholarships and savings I'd built quietly over years. My parents helped me move, their apologies still tentative, still learning how to exist without denial as a shield. Mark barely spoke to me after that. When he did, there was no apology, just bitterness. That was fine. I wasn't waiting for one. What mattered was this. The story had changed. Not because I shouted it, but because I proved it. I didn't win by destroying anyone. I won by reclaiming myself, by refusing to carry a lie that was never mine to begin with. And the last thing my grandpa said to me as I walked out of that house for the final time stayed with me. Truth doesn't need to rush, he said. It just needs patience. He was right. Hi Reddit. My name's Enzo. I'm 36, and I feel like my family has perfected the art of being impossibly entitled. I don't post much, but something happened over the last couple of weeks that I can't just shake off, and I need to get this out. My son, Mateo, just turned 8. He's obsessed with baseball. He has his little glove, a jersey that's already too small, and a grin that can light up a room. For months, I promised him I'd take him to his first live game. I even splurged a little on decent seats because I wanted it to feel special. I reached out to my family, my parents, my younger sister Clara, and my cousin Emilio. I thought it would be fun, a real family outing. They all said yes. Every single one of them. The day of the game, I woke Mateo up early, packed snacks, and loaded him into the car. His excitement was contagious. On the way, I kept checking my phone. Nothing. By the time we got to the stadium, my parents had called twice and left vague excuses, traffic, and forgot to grab cash type stuff. Clara and Emilio didn't even respond. My heart sank a little, but I figured they might still show. They didn't. I spent the next 3 hours watching Mateo's eyes light up with every pitch, every home run, every cheer from the crowd. And he was pure joy. But behind that, I couldn't shake the bitterness of being stood up by my own family. It wasn't the first time something like this had happened. Every event, every milestone, it was always, somehow, someone else's plans that mattered more. When we got home, Mateo ran to show me the little foam finger he won in a raffle. I smiled through a growing knot of anger, wondering how people could be so thoughtless. Then my phone buzzed. It was a message from my mom. Don't forget your sister's luxury cruise. $3,000 per person. Pack fancy. No greeting. No acknowledgement of the baseball disaster. No apology. Just a reminder about Clara and Emilio's next extravagant adventure. I stared at it for a while, then sent $1 back with a note. We'll pass. I thought that might be the end of it. I imagined my mom fuming, but ultimately leaving us alone. I was wrong. 2 days later, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, my dad was standing there, red-faced, and beside him was a uniformed police officer. I froze. Enzo, my dad said, voice shaking. We need to talk. The cop didn't say anything yet, just watched me. I could feel Mateo's presence behind me, peeking around the corner, confused and clutching his baseball cap. My mind raced. Did I unknowingly break some law by sending that $1? Did mom spin this into some crazy accusation? I don't understand, I stammered. You will, my dad said, taking a deep breath. It's about Clara's cruise. You will, my dad said again, his voice lower this time, like he was trying to keep control but failing. It's about Clara's cruise. I froze. My brain was running in circles. The cop next to him stood quietly, arms crossed, watching me like I was some criminal mastermind. I glanced over my shoulder at Mateo, who was now clutching his foam finger a little too tightly, eyes wide and uncertain. Dad, I don't get it, I said cautiously, stepping aside to let them in. I sent $1 back. That's it. What could possibly? You're not listening, Enzo, he interrupted. Clara says you're interfering with her plans. She claims you're trying to stop her from going on the cruise. She's saying you're preventing her from spending her money. I blinked, completely baffled. Preventing her from spending her money? Dad, it's $1. $1. I literally sent her a single dollar and a note that said we wouldn't join. How does that even matter? My dad ran a hand down his face, muttering something under his breath. The cop cleared his throat. Sir, he said to my dad, we need to clarify what the actual complaint is here. From what I've been told, this is a civil matter. No laws have been broken, but your daughter, or son, rather, needs to understand there's a formal grievance being filed. I felt my stomach drop. My parents were trying to drag me into some kind of legal nightmare over $1 and a text message. I looked at Mateo, who had moved closer to me, his small hand slipping into mine. I whispered, It's okay, buddy. Daddy's got this. Dad shook his head, his frustration practically radiating off him. This is not okay, Enzo. You can't just mock Clara like that. She's your sister. You don't get to undermine her plans. This isn't about the dollar. It's about principle. Principle. Of course. Their principle was that Clara got whatever she wanted, whenever she wanted, and anyone who disagreed was automatically in the wrong. My entire life had been a series of lessons in this warped version of fairness. When I was younger, it had been clear, if Clara wanted something, she got it. My parents would bend over backwards to make it happen. Me? I learned early that disappointment and silence were my only companions. The cop shifted his weight, and I realized he had probably seen these kinds of family disputes before. Sir, he said to my dad, are you asking for a restraining order or? Dad flinched like the words hurt him. No restraining order. He struggled, looking between the two of us, his eyes darting as if he was trying to find the right words. She's saying you're harassing her, interfering, making threats. I laughed, bitter and hollow. Threats? Dad, seriously. I sent $1. That's the extent of it. There were no threats. There was no harassment. I'm not even on the cruise. I never even called her. I didn't text her demanding anything. I literally sent $1 and said, We're passing. That's it. That's the whole story. My dad rubbed his forehead. Enzo, you don't understand. She feels intimidated. She's saying you're trying to control her. You're being aggressive. Aggressive? I felt my chest tighten. For years, my family had portrayed me as the problem. The one who couldn't be satisfied. The one who made mountains out of molehills. The one who was too sensitive or overreacting. But here, over a single dollar, they were trying to make it sound like I had launched a full-scale attack. I took a deep breath. I needed to calm myself, or I was going to explode. Listen, I said slowly, deliberately. I'm not trying to control Clara. I'm not trying to interfere with her life. But what I am trying to do is call out the way my family treats me. This entire baseball thing, this entire trip with Mateo, I invited everyone. You all promised you'd come. Not one of you showed up. Not one apology, not even a call. And now we're being attacked over a dollar? That's not fair, and you know it. Dad's face twisted. Fair? Life isn't fair, Enzo. You've always been dramatic. Clara's going on this cruise whether you like it or not, and now you're making a scene. This is exactly why I don't trust you with family matters. You're too volatile. I felt my hands clench into fists, but I forced them to relax. Mateo was watching. I couldn't let my parents make him scared of me. I couldn't let them win. The cop cleared his throat again. Sir, he said to my dad, if this escalates further, there will be paperwork. Right now, it seems like this is a misunderstanding, but it's clear there's a strong disagreement. I'm here to prevent any physical confrontation or harassment claims. Let's keep this civil. Dad nodded stiffly, looking at the cop like he expected some kind of backup. Then he turned to me, eyes blazing. You think this is just about a baseball game and a cruise. You don't get it, Enzo. This is about respect. Clara expects respect. You don't respect her. You never have. I wanted to laugh. Respect? My entire life had been me bending over backwards to accommodate them. Clara's whims, my parents' ridiculous rules, Emilio's constant demands. And now I was being lectured about respect. I shook my head. Respect isn't one-sided. Respect is mutual. You all skipped a day that was important to my son. Not a single one of you showed up, not even a message. And now you're pretending this is about anything but your own sense of entitlement. Dad's jaw tightened. You're crossing a line, Enzo. You've embarrassed the family. You've humiliated Clara. Humiliated Clara. That was the moment it clicked. This wasn't about money, a dollar, or even the cruise. This was about control. This was about power. And suddenly, a plan started forming in my mind. A plan to make them understand, once and for all, that I wasn't their doormat. Before I could say anything else, my dad's phone buzzed. He looked down, read the message, and his face drained of color. He turned to me, panic finally surfacing under the anger. Enzo, this isn't going to be easy to explain. I narrowed my eyes. Explain what? Before he could answer, the cop's phone rang. He stepped aside to take it, nodding curtly. When he hung up, he looked at both of us with a serious expression. There's been a development. You might want to sit down, sir. I glanced at Mateo, who had cautiously crept closer, his little hands clutching mine. Something in my stomach twisted. Whatever this was, it was about to get bigger. I took a deep breath and tried to steady Mateo, who was still holding my hand tightly, his little face a mix of confusion and worry. I could feel the tension radiating from my dad, and the cop had that professional something's about to get messy vibe. I still had no idea what kind of development the cop had been talking about, but whatever it wasn't going to be simple. The cop finally spoke, glancing at my dad. Sir, you're going to need to provide some context before this escalates further. Right now, we're just mediating, but it sounds like both parties are claiming they've been wronged. Dad shook his head, muttering something under his breath, clearly frustrated that someone else was listening. It's complicated, he said, though his voice cracked slightly. It's a family thing, and now it's turned into something bigger. Clara, she's claiming interference, harassment. I cut in sharply, though I kept my voice steady. You've literally turned a text message and $1 into harassment. Dad, this isn't harassment. This is you trying to turn me into the villain because I didn't bow down to Clara's latest extravagant plan. That's all this is. My dad glared at me, but the cop held up a hand. One thing at a time. Can you explain what happened leading up to this, sir? He gestured toward me. You seem to be the one being accused. I exhaled slowly. This was going to take a while, but I needed to lay it all out. Okay. My son Mateo had his first baseball game last week. I invited my parents, my sister Clara, and my cousin Emilio. They all said they'd come. Not a single one of them showed up. My son was there, excited as could be, and no one bothered to call or explain. Then, a week later, my mom sends me a text. Don't forget your sister's luxury cruise, $3,000 per person. Pack fancy. No acknowledgement, no apology, nothing about the game. I sent $1 back with a note saying, "We'll pass." That's literally it. That's the entire extent of the so-called harassment or interference. The cop nodded, jotting something down. And your son, he witnessed some of this tension? I looked down at Mateo. He was fidgeting a bit, clearly overwhelmed. He just saw the baseball thing, and he saw Dad and the cop here now. He doesn't fully understand, and I'm trying to shield him from it. My dad sighed heavily, looking like he was trying to frame this in some moral context that made him seem like the victim. Enzo, you don't see it. Clara's trip was supposed to be a family celebration. She wants to share her plans with her siblings. She's saying that your dollar and note made her feel judged, excluded. It's disrespectful. I froze for a moment, stunned. Judged? Excluded? Disrespectful? My mind reeled. For years, Clara had been treated like royalty in our family. Every whim granted, every desire validated. And now she was claiming I had somehow sabotaged her life? Over $1? I felt the anger bubbling, but I forced it down. I had to be careful. Mateo was watching, and I didn't want to let my parents scare him. I tried to keep my voice calm, but each word was deliberate. Dad, this isn't about respect or judgment. This is about entitlement. Every time Clara wants something, the rest of us are supposed to drop everything and bend to her wishes. When it comes to my son, when it comes to something that actually matters to me and him, everyone vanishes. And then I'm supposed to feel guilty for not participating in her next expensive hobby? That's not respect. That's manipulation. The cop cleared his throat and stepped slightly closer. Sir, I understand your frustration. Right now, though, we're trying to assess whether this is a civil dispute or something that could escalate legally. From what you're saying, there's no legal wrongdoing. The concern seems to be emotional impact and family tension. Dad's face turned red again, but I noticed something in his expression that I hadn't seen before: panic. Something about this situation was finally hitting him, that I wasn't going to bend, that I wasn't afraid. He glanced at the cop, then back at me. You think you're clever, don't you? Sending that dollar, making a statement. You've embarrassed the family, Enzo. You don't get to dictate what Clara does or doesn't do. You're overstepping. I tilted my head. Overstepping? Dad, you've been overstepping my entire life. You've taken my achievements, ignored my milestones, and elevated Clara above everyone else. I stood up for my son, and now I'm the problem. Dad's hands shook slightly as he muttered, "This isn't going to end well." I realized then that he had no idea what I was capable of. I had been pushed aside, dismissed, ignored, humiliated, and yet I had kept my composure for years. And now, finally, the scales were tipping. This wasn't just about a baseball game or $1 anymore. It was about every time I had been disregarded, every time my family had acted like they were entitled to my time, my money, and my respect without giving any in return. I took a step closer to him, lowering my voice but making it unmistakably firm. Dad, this stops now. I'm not apologizing for $1. I'm not groveling for approval. You and Mom have pushed too far, and I've had enough. You want to make this about a cruise, about Clara's feelings, about family respect? Fine, but I'm done being the villain in your stories. From here on out, I'm going to do what's best for me and Mateo. And if that embarrasses you or Clara, that's your problem, not mine. For the first time, I saw hesitation. Dad looked at the cop as if he was hoping for some intervention, some magical authority to rescue him from the storm he had helped create. The cop simply looked between us, expression unreadable, waiting to see what would happen next. Then, as if the universe wanted to kick things into overdrive, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and froze. It was a text from Clara. Enzo, you have no idea what you've started. This isn't over. You will regret this. Mom and Dad are already talking to lawyers. Just wait. You're making a huge mistake. I felt Mateo tug on my sleeve. Daddy, is she mad at us? I crouched down to his level, forcing a calm smile even though my chest was pounding. She's upset, buddy. But don't worry. Daddy's not going to let anyone ruin our day. We'll handle this together. I looked back at my dad. His face was red, a mixture of anger and fear. I could see that for the first time, He realized that the leverage he thought he had over me was slipping. And then I realized something else. This wasn't just about the cruise, or the dollar, or Clara. This was about power, about control, about showing who was in charge. And if they thought I was just going to roll over, they were in for a surprise. I didn't know exactly how far this was going to go, but I knew one thing for sure. I was no longer playing by their rules. And whatever they were planning, lawyers, threats, emotional manipulation, they were about to see that Enzo and Matteo weren't going to be pushed around anymore. The cop cleared his throat again, but I barely noticed. I was already thinking several steps ahead, imagining ways to make my family understand, once and for all, that the tables had turned. And deep down, a small part of me was smiling at the thought. I spent the next 24 hours doing the one thing I should have done years ago. I stopped reacting and started recording. Not in some melodramatic, revenge-way where I was planning to ruin people's lives, at least not like that. It was simpler and, I realized, far more effective. I began to create a ledger of the small cruelties and the big slights, the concrete things I could prove instead of the foggy, unhelpful feelings I'd been carrying around for decades. Screenshots of the promises everyone made to come to Matteo's game. The timestamps showing when my parents read the invite and never replied. Photos of Matteo, in his jersey, laughing at the stadium, the foam finger clutched in his tiny fist. My messages to Clara and Emilio confirming the day and time. The text from my mom about the cruise that arrived like a slap. I printed things. I put copies in an envelope and slid one into a small safe I'd had gathering dust in a closet. I told myself I wasn't building a weapon. I was building a record. If anyone tried to manipulate the narrative, and my family had always been better with narratives than facts, I wanted to be able to put the facts on the table and have them stand on their own. The next day, I did what felt like the hardest and yet most liberating thing. I set boundaries. Small, practical boundaries. I disabled group notifications that included Clara and Emilio, so their frantic social media updates wouldn't be the first thing Matteo or I saw every morning. I changed my voicemail greeting to something short and neutral. I sent a calm, measured text to Mom and Dad. No anger, no accusations, just facts and a clear request. Dad, Mom, I want to be clear. I invited you to Matteo's game. You all promised to come and did not. We were hurt. I am not interested in arguments about feelings. If you want a relationship with me and Matteo, it will be based on mutual respect. No more last-minute plans that ignore us. If you plan something that involves money or expectations, give us notice and accept a no without dramatics. If you continue to attack me over a text and $1, I will document it and seek mediation. That's not a threat. That's a boundary. I thought my dad would call and yell. He didn't. Clara didn't reply. Emilio sent a laughing emoji to a different group chat. My parents showed up at my door that night, but it was different this time. The red-faced posturing was replaced by smaller, stealthier attempts to sway me. My mom dropped off a casserole and a plate of cookies, as if domestic gestures could erase the damage. I thanked her for the food and put it in the fridge. I didn't accept the guilt. Mostly, I started to be present for my son in ways I hadn't allowed myself to be. I signed Matteo up for a local baseball clinic so he could practice with kids his age. I met other parents at the park. I laughed at stupid baseball jokes. I took Matteo to the batting cages again and didn't look back toward the empty seats that had once represented my shame. But I didn't stop there. I started to quietly line up allies. There was Rosa, the neighbor who'd watched my parents' dynamic for years and had, in the past, shaken her head and said, they always did have favorites. There was Marco, an old co-worker who knew family lawyers and, more importantly, who knew how to read legalese in a way that didn't make my head hurt. There was Jenna from the clinic, a no-nonsense single mom who'd pulled me aside after a practice and said, don't let them make you small. Kids notice when their parents are small. Each of them offered a listening ear, sometimes a practical tip, sometimes a kind of social proof. I'll be at Matteo's next game, Jenna said, and I felt that strange, warming thing. The reality that people would show up. Clara, for her part, doubled down. Her posts went up, pictures of yachts, smiles that looked staged for magazine spreads, candid shots of cocktails at sunset. The caption read like an advertisement for a life I hadn't signed up to admire. She was careful, too. When anyone in our circle mentioned the baseball game, Clara's replies were clipped and wounded. We had plans. We're so sorry we missed it. No one asked deeper questions. Then came the lawyer note. It arrived in an email, but not directly to me. Dad forwarded it with a shaking hand and a smug, apologetic note. "They're serious, Enzo. We didn't want to drag you into this, but now it's out in the open." The email was short, sterile, and threatening in the way only corporate language can be. Cease and desist, defamation, demands to remove public statements that could be construed as harmful. I read it 3 times. There were no public statements. There were no posts even hinting at legal wrongdoing. Just the ledger in my head and the printed notes in my safe. The idea that a single dollar in a note could turn into a lawsuit felt ridiculous and insane. But in another, more simmering way, it was exactly what they were good at, weaponizing fear and process to keep people small. That night, while Matteo slept with his foam finger tucked under his arm, I made a decision. Not revenge for revenge's sake. That always felt hollow, but a strategic reclaiming of my life. If they wanted to play legal theater, I'd show up with receipts. If they wanted drama, I'd hand them a script that revealed their pattern. I began drafting an answer to the lawyer's email. I consulted Marco, who told me to keep everything civil and save every message. He suggested mediation if it came to it. He suggested, more importantly, that evidence mattered far more than theatrics. The week moved in a rhythm. Practices, photos, phone calls with allies, documentation. Dad tried a new tactic. He started showing up unexpectedly, standing on the curb with a look that mixed pity and accusation. He'd come to drop off a forgotten sweater for Matteo, only to linger too long on the porch and ask barbed, leading questions about my parenting. I invited him in once, made coffee, and when he pried, I answered with simple, boring facts. We go to the clinic on Tuesdays. Matteo practices 3 times a week. He sleeps at 8. Facts were a strange kind of armor. He didn't like it. One Sunday morning, when the light in the kitchen was soft and Matteo was doodling baseball diamonds at the table, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Clara, but not the usual tone. It was short. "We need to talk. Please don't have him around when we do. I'm bringing someone." The old adrenaline hit. Panic, then hot anger, then a careful, cold resolve. She was escalating, and whatever she was bringing with her wasn't a casserole. I called Marco, who told me to breathe and to prepare. I called Rosa and Jenna and asked them to be at the clinic that afternoon under the guise of helping out. I set up my phone to record the front door. I printed the ledger again and placed a copy in the glove box of my car. When Dad knocked that afternoon, he was not alone. Behind him stood a woman in a charcoal suit, a private investigator, if my gut and the look on her face were any indication, and she held a small folder in one hand. Dad's face was calm in a way I'd never seen. It had been smoothed into a mask of righteousness. "Enzo," he said, voice rehearsed, "we're here to settle this like adults." Matteo stuck his head around the pantry door, eyes wide. "Daddy, who is that?" he asked. I felt my palms get slick. The house smelled like tomato sauce and lemon cleaner. I thought of the stadium, of Matteo's grin, of the empty seats, and of that single, stupid dollar that had broken whatever fragile truce had existed between us. I stood up slowly and walked to the door. I opened it, and the woman in the suit unfolded her folder. Inside were copies, hard copies, of messages, some edited for tone, some taken out of context, all arranged like exhibits. My dad spoke first, his voice level, that practiced warmth that used to mean something to me when I was a child. "We want to make this right," he said. "We want to move forward with dignity. But first, you need to retract what you've said. Make it clear you're not trying to control Clara. Remove your posts. Apologize." I looked at the papers, at the faces waiting on my porch, Dad's hopeful, the investigator's neutral, Clara's text echoing in my head. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the weight of choice. I could fold and smooth things over, return to the old smallness. Or I could stand my ground, even if it meant turning the spiral of this family into something we all had to live with. Facts, not narratives. I swallowed and felt the ledger in my glove box as if it were a talisman. I thought of Matteo clutching his foam finger in his sleep, of Jenna saying she'd be at the clinic, of Rosa's quiet nod. "Dad," I said, voice low but steady. "If this is about an apology, then apologize for not showing up to my son's day. Don't ask me to retract the truth. If you want a family, show up to be part of it. If you want to control the story, you'll find I've got a few facts of my own." The investigator's eyes flicked to my face. My dad's smile faltered, and for the first time I saw something fierce and animal in his expression, like a man who had always gotten what he wanted now realizing the cost of continuing to take. He moved his lips, and then the doorbell rang, 3 sharp, insistent peals cutting through the quiet. On the porch, a delivery driver stood with a package addressed to Clara. Dad's eyes went to the package, then to me, and something in his posture broke. "No," he said, voice tiny. "She wasn't supposed to be here." I felt my heartbeat quicken. I stepped back, letting the door remain open just enough that the hallway behind him showed. I didn't know if this was chance or choreography. I only knew that whatever was behind that door would change the next move. And then Clara walked up the front steps, hair perfect, sunglasses on, a smile like a social post. And right behind her, Sandra from the country club, the one who'd always posted about family values at brunches, waving like she'd stopped by for lemonade. They both looked brand new and dangerous in their calm. My dad's mouth opened and closed. The investigator shifted her weight. Mateo peeked around my leg, eyes enormous. Clara tipped her head at me and said, in a tone that felt like a guillotine lowering slowly, "Enzo, I didn't expect to find you like this." I looked at Clara standing on my porch, perfectly put together, sunglasses hiding any hint of her expression, flanked by Sandra, who had always been eager to play referee in our family drama. Dad was frozen, the mask of confidence he usually wore crumbling. My palms were steady now, not shaking, because I realized the power in this moment was finally mine. They had shown up thinking they could intimidate me. They had no idea that I'd spent the last week preparing for exactly this. I gestured toward the front steps. "Come in." My voice was calm, deliberate, unflinching. Mateo stayed behind me, clutching my leg, eyes wide but curious. I wanted him to see that standing up for yourself didn't have to be scary. It could be firm and fair. Clara stepped inside, carefully, like a queen surveying a peasant's home. Sandra followed, notebook in hand, as if she were taking attendance for a jury. Dad lingered by the door, helpless. I motioned for him to sit. He hesitated, finally lowering himself onto the couch with a heavy sigh. "I assume this is about the cruise," I said evenly. "Or perhaps it's about the dollar I sent. The note I wrote saying we'd pass." Clara's smile didn't reach her eyes. "It's not just about the dollar, Enzo. It's about control. You've made this a personal attack. You're undermining the family. Mom is furious. Dad is furious." I shook my head, cutting her off. "No, I'm not undermining the family. I'm exposing the pattern you all use to control people. For years, I've watched you. Clara, take whatever you want, whenever you want, with everyone else bending to your whims. The cruise is just another example. And now you're pretending that $1 and a note somehow hurts you. That's entitlement. That's what this is." Sandra cleared her throat, notebook poised. "Sir, you need to be careful. These are serious accusations." "I'm stating facts," I said calmly, holding up the ledger I had printed. "These are receipts. Dates, times, confirmations. Proof that my invitations were ignored. Proof that apologies were never made. Proof that entitlement has been the rule, not the exception, in this family for as long as I can remember." Clara's face twisted slightly. She had always been good at maintaining composure, but now she was clearly rattled. She tried to speak, but the words faltered. "You're making this dramatic," she said finally. "It's just a family misunderstanding." "I didn't." "Misunderstanding," I echoed, leaning forward. "You left my son waiting for hours at his first baseball game. You ignored him. Not a single apology. And now, instead of acknowledging that, you're threatening me over $1 because I didn't join your cruise. That's not a misunderstanding. That's manipulation." Dad finally found his voice, shaking. "Enzo, this isn't how we do things. You're tearing the family apart." I stood, taking the ledger out of my hand and setting it on the coffee table so everyone could see. "No, you've been tearing the family apart for years, one selfish act at a time. I'm the first one to actually document it. I'm the first one to stand up. And I'm not stopping here." Clara's eyes flicked nervously to Dad. "Mom, she's going to be furious when she finds out you." I didn't let her finish. "Send her my regards," I said simply. "Because from this point forward, we're done pretending that your feelings are more important than my son's happiness or my own peace of mind. Mateo and I will live our life on our terms, not yours." Sandra's hand twitched toward her notebook, probably ready to note down some official statement. but I ignored her. Dad's jaw tightened, realizing the words I spoke weren't up for negotiation. Clara's face was pale now, her smile gone entirely. I reached over to Mateo and motioned for him to come forward. "Mateo, show them your glove," I said. He held up his little baseball glove, wide-eyed and proud. "This was my day," I said, voice steady. "I made it about you. I didn't need anyone else's approval. And neither will I from this family again." Clara opened her mouth again, but no words came. Dad looked like he wanted to argue, to yell, to twist reality. But even he could see that nothing they had could counter the truth in that room. They had been confronted by facts, by proof, and by a calm certainty they couldn't intimidate. Without another word, Clara turned on her heel and marched to the door. Sandra followed, muttering something under her breath about handling this legally. Dad stayed behind for a moment, looking between me and Mateo, eyes hollow, finally realizing that his authority in our home had evaporated. I watched them leave. The door clicked shut. Silence filled the living room. Mateo turned and hugged my leg. "Daddy, did we win?" I knelt down, holding him close. "We did, buddy. We finally won. And this time, nobody can take it away from us." Over the next few days, the fallout continued. Dad sent curt texts. Clara tried posting pictures on social media with captions meant to guilt us. Emilio called once, carefully phrased, trying to test the waters. But nothing stuck. The ledger and the quiet confidence I had built acted like a shield. My parents tried to manipulate, to shame, to guilt, but I was untouchable because I had documented their pattern, I had prepared, and I had refused to let fear dictate my actions. In the end, the situation was clear. My family had revealed themselves fully. They were entitled, manipulative, and unwilling to acknowledge anyone else's feelings or rights. Their sense of control had been broken, and they couldn't regain it. Clara didn't get her apology from me. She didn't get to erase the truth. Dad didn't get to lecture or intimidate me. And Mateo? He got the day he deserved, proof that his father would always stand up for him, no matter what. I finally understood something fundamental. Revenge wasn't about anger. It wasn't about hurting them back. It was about reclaiming my space, my dignity, my peace, and showing them, in every fact, every printed receipt, every calm word, that the game had changed. From that day forward, the rules were mine. I would never be the pawn in their entitlement again. And if they wanted to try, I was ready. Mateo and I went back to the stadium the next week. He ran ahead, glove in hand, shouting with joy. I watched him, smiling, the weight of years of being dismissed finally lifting. And I knew, no apology, no guilt, no entitlement from anyone in that family could ever touch us again. We had won. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments. If you like this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this.